I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. The headlights of the car behind me flashed again, turning the inside of my car into a momentary disco ball. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white against the black leather. This wasn't just another car on a lonely highway anymore. This was a hunter, and I was its prey. It all started about 2 hours ago. I'd been at a work conference in Phoenix, and rather than stay another night at the overpriced hotel, I decided to drive back home to Tucson. It's only a 2-hour trip, I thought. What could go wrong? The sun had just dipped below the horizon when I pulled out of the hotel parking lot. My sedan loaded with my suitcase and a box of conference swag I'd probably never use. The first hour of the drive was uneventful. The sky faded from orange to deep blue, then to black, studded with stars you can only see when you're miles from the city. I hummed along to the radio, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert. Every now and then, I'd pass another car, or one would pass me. Normal nighttime traffic. It was when I hit the halfway point that I first noticed the car behind me. Nothing special about it at first, just a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. But as the miles ticked by, I realized it was keeping pace with me. Not unusual, I told myself. Plenty of people set their cruise control. But then I noticed something else. Every time I changed lanes, it changed lanes. When I sped up a little, it sped up too. When I slowed down, so did it. "You're being paranoid, Sarah," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. The radio DJ announced it was just past 11 p.m. Still an hour to go. I decided to test my theory. There was an exit coming up, one of those middle-of-nowhere exits that lead to God knows where. At the last second, I swerved onto the off-ramp. The car followed. My heart started to race. This wasn't just my imagination anymore. I drove through the empty intersection at the end of the ramp, then got right back on the highway. The car was still behind me. "Okay, don't panic," I said aloud, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe they just needed to check their GPS or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my speed up to 80. Then 85. The speedometer crept towards 90, as the desert landscape blurred past my windows. But no matter how fast I went, those headlights stayed right there in my mirror. My palms were sweating now, leaving damp prints on the steering wheel. I fumbled for my phone in the cup holder, thinking I should call someone. The police. What would I even say? Help. A car is following me by driving on the same public highway I'm on. I glanced down at my phone, trying to unlock it with shaky fingers. When I looked back up, the headlights behind me flashed. Once, twice, 3 times. A scream caught in my throat. This wasn't just following anymore. This was a message. They knew I knew. My eyes darted to the GPS on my dashboard. Still 45 minutes from Tucson. 45 minutes suddenly felt like an eternity. I saw another exit approaching and made a split-second decision. I took it, not bothering to signal. The car followed, closer now than ever. This exit led to a 2-lane road that snaked through the desert. No streetlights out here, just the glow of my headlights illuminating the cracked asphalt and scrubby vegetation. And behind me, those ever-present following lights. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I try to outrun them? My sedan wasn't exactly built for speed. Should I pull over and confront them? The thought made my stomach churn. Who knew what kind of person was behind the wheel? I took a sharp right onto an even smaller road, little more than a path, really. My car bounced and jostled on the uneven surface. Rocks pinged against the undercarriage. But still, the lights followed. Come on, I muttered, scanning the darkness for something, an escape route, a safe haven, anything. And then I saw it, a glint of metal in my headlights, a gate blocking an old dirt road, probably leading to some long-abandoned ranch or mine. I slammed on the brakes and cranked the wheel, skidding to a stop in front of the gate. I threw the car into park and fumbled with my seatbelt, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. The pursuing car slowed, then stopped about 50 feet behind me. We sat there for a moment, two cars facing each other in the middle of nowhere, headlights cutting through the darkness. My breath came in short gasps. What now? What now? And then, the other car's door opened. I froze, my hand on the door handle. Run, stay in the car. Every option seemed wrong. A figure stepped out of the other car. Tall, broad-shouldered, definitely a man. He stood there for a moment, half illuminated by his own headlights. Then he started walking towards me. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I watched, paralyzed, as the figure drew closer. 10 feet away, 5 feet. He stopped right next to my driver's side window. With trembling fingers, I pressed the button to lower the window, just a crack. Enough to hear, not enough for him to reach in. "Car trouble?" a deep voice asked. I blinked, confusion momentarily overriding my fear. "What?" I said. "Car trouble?" The man repeated. "I saw you pull off suddenly and followed to see if you needed help. Everything okay?" I stared at him, my mind struggling to process this turn of events. In the dim light, I could make out a concerned expression on a weathered face. He was wearing a polo shirt with some kind of company logo on it. I thought you were following me," I stammered. He chuckled, but not unkindly. "Well, I guess I was, in a way. I'm with Arizona Highway Patrol. We keep an eye out for stranded motorists, especially this time of night." As if to prove his point, he shined a flashlight on his shirt. Sure enough, there was the Highway Patrol logo. "Oh," was all I could manage to say. "You took some pretty wild turns back there," he said. "Had me worried you were having engine trouble or something. Everything all right with your vehicle?" I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and embarrassment wash over me. "Yes, it's fine. I thought you thought I was some kind of crazy pursuing you in the night." He finished for me, a hint of a smile in his voice. I nodded again, feeling my cheeks burn. "Don't be embarrassed," he said. "You can never be too careful out here. Tell you what, why don't you follow me back to the highway? I'll escort you to the next rest stop so you can take a breather." That would be great, thank you," I said, my voice small. As I watched him walk back to his car, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins for the past hour began to ebb. By the time we reached the well-lit rest stop, my hands had almost stopped shaking. I pulled into a parking spot and got out of the car on wobbly legs. The highway patrol officer, Jim, he'd told me to call him, stood nearby, giving me space but staying close enough to chat. "You know," he said as I leaned against my car, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. He did the right thing, being cautious. Too many folks out there don't pay attention to their surroundings. I managed a weak smile. "I guess. I just feel silly now." Single quotes. Jim shook his head. "Don't. Better safe than sorry, always." You want some advice from someone who's spent way too many nights out on these roads? I nodded. Trust your gut, he said seriously. If something feels off, it probably is. You felt something was wrong tonight, and you acted on it. The fact that it turned out okay doesn't mean you were wrong to be careful. His words settled over me, and I felt some of the lingering embarrassment fade away. Thank you, I said, meaning it. Jim tipped his hat. You gonna be okay to drive the rest of the way? I took stock of myself. The panic had subsided, replaced by a bone-deep wariness. But under that, there was something else. A newfound confidence, maybe. I'd faced my fear, even if it turned out to be unfounded. I'd survived the night. Yeah, I said, straightening up. Yeah, I think I'll be fine. As I watched Jim's taillights disappear into the night, I took one more deep breath before getting back in my car. The highway stretched out before me, no longer menacing, just a road home. I put the car in drive, feeling the quiet hum of the engine. As I pulled back onto the highway, I caught my own eyes in the rearview mirror. They looked different somehow. Steadier, stronger. Whatever the night had in store, I was ready for it. Story 2. The day Mr. Eldridge moved in next door was the beginning of the end for Maple Street. None of us knew it then, of course. We were too busy being charmed by his twinkling blue eyes and grandfatherly smile. But I should have known better. I should have trusted my gut. It was a warm Saturday in late May when the moving truck pulled up to the old Johnson place. I was out front, fussing with my roses, when I first laid eyes on our new neighbor. He climbed out of a sensible sedan, all 5'0" of him, wearing pressed khakis and a cardigan despite the heat. Well, hello there, he called out, waving enthusiastically. I'm Gerald Eldridge, your new neighbor. I straightened up, wiping my soil-covered hands on my gardening apron. Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Eldridge. I'm Lisa Hawkins. He ambled over, his gait slow but steady. Up close, I could see the liver spots on his hands, the deep creases around his eyes. He had to be pushing 80, at least. Please, call me Gerald, he insisted, reaching out to shake my hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. I hope you don't mind having an old codger like me next door. I laughed politely. Not at all. Maple Street's a quiet place. I'm sure you'll fit right in. And boy, did he ever. Within a week, Gerald had charmed the entire neighborhood. He brought Mrs. Peterson across the street a homemade apple pie. He offered to mow the Thompsons' lawn when their mower broke down. He even volunteered to coach little Timmy Wilson's little league team. Isn't he just the sweetest thing? My next-door neighbor, on the other side, Karen, gushed over our shared fence. Did you know he used to be a high school principal? All those years shaping young minds. It's no wonder he's so good with kids. I nodded, feeling a strange unease I couldn't quite place. Yeah, he's certainly involved. Karen didn't seem to notice my hesitation. Oh, and get this. He's invited the whole street over for a barbecue this weekend. Isn't that thoughtful? I forced a smile. Very. The barbecue was a hit, of course. Gerald's backyard was immaculate, with fairy lights strung up and the grills sizzling with burgers and hot dogs. He moved through the crowd with ease, always ready with a joke or a compliment. I was grabbing a soda from the cooler when I overheard him talking to Bob Green, who lived at the end of the street. And that's when I decided to retire to this lovely town, Gerald was saying. After losing my Martha last year, I just needed a change of scenery. Bob clapped him on the shoulder sympathetically. I'm sorry for your loss, Gerald, but we're glad to have you here. I frowned, my hand pausing on the soda can. Hadn't Gerald told Karen he moved here to be closer to his grandkids? I shook my head, dismissing the thought. Maybe I'd misheard Karen, or maybe Gerald had multiple reasons for moving. It wasn't a big deal. But as the weeks went by, I started noticing other little inconsistencies in Gerald's stories. He told the Wilsons he'd been a high school principal in Ohio, but I could have sworn he told me it was Pennsylvania. When chatting about his military service, the dates never quite lined up right. Each discrepancy was small, easy to write off as a senior moment or my own faulty memory. But they started to add up, gnawing at the back of my mind. One evening, about a month after Gerald moved in, I was watering my front lawn when I saw him shuffling down the sidewalk, a leash in his hand. "Evening, Lisa," he called out cheerfully. "Just taking old Russ for here for his walk." I blinked in confusion. There was no dog at the end of that leash. Gerald," I said hesitantly. "Where's Rusvy?" He looked down at the empty leash, then back at me, his brow furrowed in genuine puzzlement. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, a sharp, calculating look that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Oh, silly me," he chuckled, his grandfatherly persona slipping seamlessly back into place. "I must have forgotten to actually bring him out. You know how it is at my age. The mind's the first thing to go." He turned around, heading back to his house with a wave. "Thanks for the reminder, Lisa. I'd better go fetch the old boy before he thinks I've abandoned him." I stood there, hose in hand, water puddling at my feet. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm evening air. I'd never seen a dog at Gerald's house, never heard a bark, never seen a food bowl or toys in his yard. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, Gerald's empty leash and those inconsistent stories swirling in my mind. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and fired up my laptop. I started with a simple Google search. Gerald Eldridge, principal. Nothing relevant came up. I tried narrowing it down with state names. Ohio, Pennsylvania, even neighboring states. Still nothing. Frowning, I switched tactics. I searched for obituaries, mentioning a Martha Eldridge. There were a few, but none that seemed to match Gerald's story. As the night wore on, I dug deeper. Social media, public records, news archives. The more I looked, the less I found. It was as if Gerald Eldridge didn't exist before he moved to our street. The next morning, bleary-eyed from my late-night research, I was pouring my third cup of coffee when I heard a commotion outside. I peeked out the window to see a police car parked in front of the Thompsons' house. I slipped outside, joining the small crowd of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. Karen was there, her face pale. "What's going on?" I asked. She turned to me, her eyes wide. "It's little Annie Thompson. She's missing." My blood ran cold. Annie was only 6, a sweet little girl who was always riding her bike up and down the street. "Missing," I echoed. "Since when?" "Since last night," Karen whispered. "They tucked her in around 8, but when they went to wake her for school this morning, she was gone." Her window was wide open. As the police interviewed the distraught Thompsons, I scanned the crowd. Everyone from the street was there, concern etched on their faces. Everyone except, "Where's Gerald?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Karen looked around, surprised. "That's odd. He's usually the first one out when anything happens on the street. Maybe he's not feeling well." I nodded absently, my mind racing. Could it be a coincidence? The kindly old man next door, the missing little girl. No, I was jumping to conclusions. There had to be a reasonable explanation. But as the days passed and Annie remained missing, my suspicions grew. Gerald was conspicuously absent from the neighborhood search parties and vigils. When he did emerge from his house, He seemed distracted, his usual charm strained. A week after Annie's disappearance, I was up late again, scouring the internet for any scrap of information about Gerald. That's when I stumbled upon a news article from a small town in Oregon, dated 3 years ago. Local girl missing, elderly neighbor questioned. The headline read, "My heart pounding." I clicked on the link. The article detailed the disappearance of an 8-year-old girl named Sophie Chun. The prime suspect? A recently arrived elderly neighbor who called himself George Edwards. The description matched Gerald to a T, right down to the twinkling blue eyes and grandfatherly demeanor. But here was the kicker. George Edwards had vanished before the police could question him further. The article included a grainy security camera photo, and even though it wasn't great quality, I knew without a doubt George Edwards was our Gerald Eldridge. My hands shaking, I dug further. I found similar stories scattered across the country. Different names, different towns, but always the same pattern. A charming, elderly man moves in. He becomes a beloved neighborhood fixture. A child goes missing. The old man disappears. As the pieces fell into place, a wave of nausea washed over me. How could we have been so blind? How could I have ignored my instincts? I reached for my phone, ready to call the police, when a knock at the door made me jump. I glanced at the clock. 11:23 p.m. Who could it be at this hour? Heart pounding, I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. There, illuminated by my porch light, stood Gerald. He was smiling that grandfatherly smile, but it no longer reached his eyes. Those eyes were cold, calculating. "Lisa?" he called out, his voice muffled through the door. "I saw your lights on and thought I'd check in. Is everything all right?" I stood frozen, barely breathing. Did he know what I'd discovered? Had he seen me on my computer through the window, Lisa? He called again, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "I know you're in there. Why don't you open up? We really should talk." In that moment, I knew. The kindly old man facade was just that. A facade. Behind that door was something far more sinister. Something that had been hiding in plain sight all along. As Gerald knocked again, more insistently this time, I realized with horrifying clarity that Maple Street's nightmare was only just beginning. Story 3. The first time I saw him, I thought nothing of it. The second time, I convinced myself it was a coincidence. By the third time, I knew something was terribly wrong. But by then, it was too late. I was alone in the wilderness, and he knew far more about me than any stranger should. It all started on a crisp autumn morning. I'd been planning this solo hiking trip for months. A chance to clear my head after a messy breakup and an even messier career change. 5 days in the Adirondacks, just me and the great outdoors. What could go wrong? I remember standing at the trailhead, inhaling deeply. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and decaying leaves. A light mist hung over the forest, giving everything a dreamlike quality. I adjusted my backpack, heavy with supplies, and set off down the trail. The first few hours were exactly what I needed. The rhythmic crunch of leaves under my boots, the distant call of birds, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It all worked to quiet the constant chatter in my mind. I fell into an easy pace, my muscles warming to the familiar motion of hiking. It was around midday when I first saw him. I'd stopped at a small clearing to eat my lunch, perched on a fallen log. As I was packing up, movement at the edge of the clearing caught my eye. A man emerged from the trees, tall and lean, dressed in hiking gear not unlike my own. He nodded in my direction. "Beautiful day for a hike," he called out. I nodded back. offering a polite smile. Sure is, he continued on his way, disappearing down the trail ahead of me. I thought nothing of it at the time. Plenty of people enjoyed these trails, after all. I spent that night at a designated campsite, falling asleep to the gentle patter of rain on my tent. The next morning dawned clear and cool. I broke camp early, eager to make good time. The trail grew steeper as the day wore on, winding its way up the mountainside. By early afternoon, my legs were burning, and I was grateful for the frequent switchbacks that offered brief reprieves. I rounded one such bend and nearly collided with someone coming the other way. I stumbled back, an apology on my lips, and found myself face to face with the same man from yesterday. "Oh," I exclaimed, surprised. "Hello again." He smiled, and something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was too wide, too knowing. "Hello again, indeed," he said. "Fancy meeting you here." I laughed nervously. Small world, I guess. Or small trail, at least. He chuckled, but the sound held no warmth. "You could say that." "Enjoying your hike, Emma?" I froze. I hadn't told him my name yesterday. I was sure of it. "How did you—" "Oh, I'm sorry," he interrupted smoothly. "I must have overheard someone at the campsite last night. You were there too, right?" I nodded slowly, though I couldn't remember seeing him at the campsite. Then again, I'd turned in early. Maybe he'd arrived after I was already in my tent. "Well, enjoy the rest of your trip," he said, already moving past me. "I'm sure we'll run into each other again." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. It sounded less like a casual goodbye and more like a promise. I spent the rest of that day looking over my shoulder, jumping at every snapped twig or rustling leaf. But I didn't see the man again, and by the time I made camp that night, I had almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. The third day dawned grey and gloomy. A heavy mist hung in the air, limiting visibility and giving the forest an eerie, muffled quality. I packed up quickly, eager to get moving and shake off the lingering unease from yesterday's encounter. The trail today led through a dense section of forest. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches intertwining overhead to create a natural tunnel. The mist swirled around my feet as I walked, making it seem like I was wading through a ghostly river. I was so focused on the path ahead that I almost missed the figure leaning against a tree, just off the trail. Almost. My heart leapt into my throat as I recognized him, the man from before. He was standing perfectly still, watching me approach with that same unsettling smile. "Good morning, Emma," he said casually, as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. "Sleep well." I stopped dead in my tracks, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Why are you following me?" He pushed off from the tree, taking a step towards me. I scrambled backward, my heel catching on a root. I stumbled, but managed to keep my footing. "Following you," he repeated, sounding amused. "I'm just enjoying the trail, same as you. It's not my fault we keep running into each other." "Bullshit," I spat, finding courage in my fear. "You knew my name yesterday." "How?" He cocked his head to the side, studying me. "You really should be more careful about what you post online, Emma. All those pictures of your gear laid out, your detailed itinerary. Anyone could find that information if they knew where to look." My blood ran cold. I had posted about my trip on Instagram, excited to share my adventure with friends, but my account was private. How could he have seen that? As if reading my mind, he chuckled. "Social media is never as private as you think, Emma. Especially when you accept friend requests from people you don't really know. Like that personal trainer you started following last month. What was his name again? Oh, right. It was me. My mind reeled. I remembered the request. A fitness account I'd followed on a whim, thinking it might motivate me to stay in shape. I'd never imagined. What do you want? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. He took another step forward. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. I just want to talk, Emma. About Kevin. The name hit me like a physical blow. Kevin, my ex. The reason I was out here in the first place. How do you know about Kevin? I whispered. His smile widened. I know a lot of things, Emma. I know how he hurt you. How he cheated, lied, made you feel worthless. I know you came out here to forget him, but you can't, can you? He's always there, in the back of your mind. Tears pricked at my eyes. How could this stranger know these things? These private pains I'd never shared with anyone. I can help you forget, Emma, he continued, his voice soft, almost hypnotic. I can make all that pain go away. Just come with me. I have a cabin not far from here. We can talk properly there. A part of me, a small, broken part, wanted to say yes. Wanted to follow this man who seemed to understand my pain so completely. But a larger part, the part that had dragged me out into these woods to find myself again, screamed danger. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. No, I said firmly. I don't know who you are or how you know these things, but I want you to leave me alone, now. For a moment. His face darkened, that friendly mask slipping to reveal something cold and angry underneath. But then it was gone, replaced by that unsettling smile once more. As you wish, Emma, he said, stepping back. But remember, I'm never far away. When you're ready to talk, to really heal, I'll be here. He melted back into the mist-shrouded forest, leaving me alone on the trail, shaking and confused. I didn't sleep that night. I made camp in a small cave, my back pressed against the cold stone, eyes fixed on the entrance. Every shadow, every sound had me flinching, expecting to see his face emerge from the darkness. As the first light of dawn crept into the cave, I made a decision. This trip was supposed to be about finding myself, about healing. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare. It was time to go home. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking as I stuffed gear into my backpack. The journey back to the trailhead was a blur of paranoia and adrenaline. Every snapped twig was him following me. Every rustle in the undergrowth was him lying in wait. It wasn't until I reached my car, safely locked inside with the engine running, that I finally allowed myself to break down. Sobs racked my body as the full weight of the past few days crashed over me. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me leave. But when I looked again, there was nothing there. I drove home in a daze, jumping at every car that stayed behind me for too long. It wasn't until I was safely in my apartment, doors locked and curtains drawn, that I finally felt like I could breathe again. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed with a notification. A new follower request on Instagram. The username made my blood run cold. Trailfriend_ADK. With shaking fingers, I deleted the app from my phone. But as I set the device aside, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. He was out there, watching, waiting. And no matter how far I ran, a part of me would always be back on that misty trail, face to face with a stranger who knew me far too well. Story 4. The moment I stepped into room 237, I knew something was off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a feeling, a slight prickling at the back of my neck. But as the night wore on, That feeling grew into a certainty. I wasn't alone in this room, and whatever was in here with me, it didn't want me to leave. I'd checked in late, around 11 p.m. The Pinewood Inn wasn't much to look at, just your standard roadside motel, all faded paint and flickering neon. But after 8 hours of driving, it looked like the Ritz. The night clerk barely looked up from his ancient computer as he handed me the key. "Room 237, he mumbled. "Up the stairs, end of the hall." I nodded my thanks, shouldered my overnight bag, and trudged up the creaky stairs. The hallway was dimly lit, the carpet a garish pattern that might have been fashionable in the 70s. Room 237 was the last door on the left. The lock stuck a bit, but after a bit of jiggling, the door swung open with a low groan. I fumbled for the light switch, blinking as harsh fluorescent light flooded the room. It was fine. Nothing special, nothing terrible. A queen-sized bed with a floral comforter. A dresser with a TV that had probably seen the Carter administration. A small table with a single chair. A door that presumably led to the bathroom. I dropped my bag on the bed, and that's when I noticed the first oddity. There was an indent in the comforter, like someone had been sitting there just moments before. I ran my hand over it. The fabric was warm. Housekeeping must have just been in here, I muttered to myself, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. Who does turn down service at a place like this, especially at this hour? Too tired to dwell on it, I grabbed my toiletry bag and headed for the bathroom. The light flickered as I flipped the switch, casting strange shadows on the cracked tile floor. I splashed some water on my face, the pipes groaning in protest as I turned the faucet. As I reached for a towel, something in the mirror caught my eye. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the doorway behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room beyond. "Get it together, Alex," I chided myself. "You're just tired." Seeing things, I changed quickly into my pajamas, eager to crawl into bed and put this weird night behind me. But as I was about to turn off the main light, I noticed something else. The chair at the small table wasn't pushed in neatly like you'd expect in a freshly cleaned room. It was angled out slightly, as if someone had just gotten up from it. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that chair. Then, moving slowly, I walked over and pushed it in. The scrape of wood on carpet seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the old building, every distant sound of traffic had me on edge. I dozed fitfully, strange dreams plaguing what little sleep I got. I'm not sure what time it was when I jolted awake, every nerve in my body screaming danger. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels almost solid. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back, the long drive, the strange motel. Room 237. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There a soft sound, barely audible over my own breathing. It sounded like footsteps, but not normal footsteps. These were off, somehow, arrhythmic and dragging, like someone limping slowly across the room. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure whatever it was must be able to hear it. I wanted to reach for the bedside lamp, to dispel this terrifying darkness, but I was paralyzed with fear. What if turning on the light revealed something I really didn't want to see? The footsteps, if that's what they were, seemed to be moving around the foot of the bed now. I could feel the presence of something getting closer. The air felt thick, oppressive. I couldn't breathe. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when I was about to scream or bolt from the bed, the footsteps stopped. For a long, agonizing moment, there was complete silence. Then, from right next to the bed, came a sound that turned my blood to Isalon. Rattling exhale, like the last breath of a dying man. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was frozen in terror, the next I was lunging for the bedside lamp. My trembling fingers found the switch, and suddenly the room was bathed in harsh light. Nothing. The room was empty. I sat there, gulping in great lungfuls of air, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. Had I dreamed it? Was I going crazy? As my racing heart began to slow, I noticed something that made it speed right back up again. The chair at the table was pulled out again, angled exactly as it had been when I first entered the room. I was out of that bed in a flash, throwing on clothes with shaking hands. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I didn't care that I'd paid for the whole night. I had to get out of there. As I was shoving things haphazardly into my bag, a glint of something white caught my eye. There, on the dresser, was a piece of paper that definitely hadn't been there before. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. It was a receipt, the kind you get when you check out of a hotel. But this one was old, yellowed with age, and the date at the top made my stomach lurch May 17th, 1985. Nearly 40 years ago. But it was the name on the receipt that really got me. Alex Larson. My name. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. I wasn't even born in 1985. How could there be a receipt with my name? From a loud thump from the bathroom made me jump, the receipt fluttering from my nerveless fingers. I stared at the closed bathroom door, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Thump. There it was again, like something heavy falling, or someone pounding on the other side of the door. I knew I should run, grab my bag and get the hell out of there. But some morbid curiosity, some need to understand what was happening, kept me rooted to the spot. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I approached the bathroom door. The thumping had stopped, but now I could hear something else, a soft, rhythmic sound, almost like crying. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Did I really want to see what was on the other side? But I had to know. I had to understand. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and turned the knob. The bathroom was dark, but in the light spilling in from the bedroom, I could make out a figure huddled in the bathtub. It was hunched over, shaking with quiet sobs. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I could see it was a man. An older man with graying hair. "Hello," I called out softly, my voice quavering. "Are you okay?" The figure stiffened at the sound of my voice. Slowly, so slowly, it began to turn towards me. I knew, even before I saw its face, what I was going to see. I knew it with a certainty that defied all logic and reason. But that didn't make it any less terrifying when the figure fully turned and I found myself staring into my own eyes. It was me, older, weathered, with lines of fear and desperation etched deep into my face, but unmistakably me. The other Alex, the older Alex, looked at me with a mixture of terror and resignation. When he spoke, his voice was a raspy whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of time itself. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "You can never leave now. None of us can." As if summoned by his words, I became aware of other presences in the room. Shadowy figures began to materialize in the shower, by the sink, in every corner. All of them were me, at different ages, all wearing the same expression of hopeless despair. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. I turned to flee, to escape this nightmare, only to find my way blocked. There, in the doorway, stood the night clerk, but his eyes were hollow now, his smile too wide, too knowing. When he spoke, it was with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome back to the Pinewood Inn, Mr. Larson," he said. "We hope you enjoy your eternal stay." The door to room 237 slammed shut with a finality that echoed through time itself. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that I would never leave this room again. That I had always been here, and always would be. In the Pinewood, in room 237, time had no meaning, and neither did escape. Story 5. The first time I noticed them, I thought it was just a bizarre coincidence. The second time, I wondered if I was losing my mind. By the third time, I knew something was terribly wrong. But by then, it was too late. They were always there, watching, waiting, no matter where I went or what I did. And I had no idea why. It started on a Monday, like most nightmare weeks do. I dragged myself out of bed at the ungodly hour of 6 a.m., fumbling for my phone to silence the shrill alarm. The September air was crisp as I shuffled to the bathroom, my bare feet sticking slightly to the cold tile floor. I went through my morning routine on autopilot. Shower, teeth, hair, makeup. By 7:15, I was out the door, travel mug of coffee in hand, ready to face another mind-numbing day at the office. The subway station was its usual chaos of commuters. All of us packed together like sardines, avoiding eye contact as we waited for the train. When it finally screeched into the station, I wedged myself into the crowded car, grabbing onto a pole for dear life as we lurched forward. That's when I first saw them. There were 5 of them, scattered throughout the car. A middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun. A young man in a perfectly pressed suit. An elderly gentleman leaning heavily on a cane. A teenage girl with bright purple hair. And a heavy-set man in a janitor's uniform. Nothing unusual about any of them individually, but something made me look twice. They were all standing in the exact same position. Right hand on the pole, left hand holding a newspaper. Who even reads physical newspapers anymore? Feet planted shoulder-width apart, and none of them were swaying with the motion of the train. I blinked hard. Sure, I was imagining things. When I looked again, they had all shifted slightly. The woman was now rifling through her purse. The young man was checking his watch. Normal subway behavior. I shook my head, chalking it up to too little sleep and too much caffeine. By the time I got to my stop, I'd almost forgotten about it. Almost. The workday dragged on as usual. Endless meetings, passive-aggressive emails, the constant hum of fluorescent lights that seemed designed to slowly drive you insane. By 5 p.m., I was more than ready to head home. I was so focused on thoughts of takeout and Netflix that I almost missed it. But as I stepped onto the subway car, a chill ran down my spine. There they were again, the same 5 people, in the exact same positions as this morning. My heart started to race. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe they all worked together. But no, they weren't interacting at all. They weren't even looking at each other. I spent the entire ride home stealing glances at them, trying to catch them. Doing what, exactly? I didn't know. But every time I looked, they were just standing there, unnaturally still, unnaturally present. When I got to my stop, I practically ran off the train. I could feel their eyes on my back as the doors closed behind me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, blank, watching, waiting. The next morning, I seriously considered calling in sick, but that felt like giving in to paranoia. So I dragged myself out of bed, got ready, and headed to the station. My hands were shaking as I waited on the platform. Part of me hoped they wouldn't be there. A bigger part knew they would be. Sure enough, as soon as the train doors opened, I saw them. Same positions, same clothes, same blank expressions. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the person next to me and say, "Do you see them? Tell me you see them." But I didn't, because deep down, I knew. Nobody else could see what I was seeing. The rest of the week passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. Every single train ride, morning and evening, they were there. Always in the same car as me, no matter which one I chose. Always in those same unnatural positions. By Friday, I was a wreck. Dark circles under my eyes, jumping at every sound. My co-workers were starting to give me concerned looks. But how could I explain? Sorry, I'm just being stalked by a group of people on the subway who might not actually exist. Yeah, that would go over well. I decided I needed to shake things up, break the pattern. So instead of going straight home after work, I went to a bar a few blocks from the office. Maybe a drink or two would calm my nerves. Maybe if I took a later train, they wouldn't be there. I nursed a gin and tonic, watching the after-work crowd slowly thin out. By 8 p.m., I figured it was late enough. I paid my tab and headed for the station, my steps lighter than they had been all week. That lightness evaporated the moment I stepped onto the platform. There they were, all 5 of them, waiting. As the train pulled in, I felt a surge of defiance. Enough was enough. I was going to confront them, demand answers, or at least prove to myself, once and for all, that I wasn't crazy. I marched onto the car, heading straight for the elderly man with the cane. But as I opened my mouth to speak, something stopped me cold. He was looking right at me. They all were. 5 pairs of eyes, all fixed on my face. And in those eyes, I saw nothing. No emotion, no humanity, just endless, empty depth. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the closed doors. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like their gaze was physically holding me in place. The teenage girl's mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was deep, resonant, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Why do you resist?" it asked. "You are one of us now." The middle-aged woman's mouth moved next, the same voice emerging. "You have been chosen. It is an honor." My head was spinning. This couldn't be real. None of this could be real. The young man in the suit spoke next. "Your life as you knew it is over. Accept your new purpose." I found my voice, finally. "What purpose?" I croaked. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The heavy-set janitor's mouth opened. "We are the Watchers. We maintain the balance. And now, you will join us." As he spoke, I noticed something horrifying. Their faces were changing, melting, shifting, features blurring and reforming, and they were all starting to look like me. I screamed then, a raw, primal sound that tore from my throat. I clawed at the doors behind me, desperate to escape. Suddenly, the train jerked to a stop. The doors opened, and I fell backward onto the platform. Without thinking, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. I ran until I didn't recognize the streets around me anymore. Finally, I collapsed on a bench in some unknown neighborhood, gulping in great lungfuls of air. As my breathing slowed, I took stock of my surroundings. It was fully dark now, the street lit by the sickly glow of sodium lamps. The sidewalks were empty. In the distance, I could hear the faint rumble of traffic. I pulled out my phone, intending to call an Uber. But as the screen lit up, my blood ran cold. There, reflected in the dark glass, were 5 familiar faces, standing behind me, watching, waiting. I whirled around, but the street behind me was empty. When I looked back at my phone, the reflection was gone. With shaking hands, I managed to order a ride. As I waited, I huddled on the bench, jumping at every shadow, every sound. The Uber driver gave me a concerned look as I climbed in, but didn't comment on my disheveled state. I mumbled my address and then sat in tense silence for the entire ride, my eyes darting constantly to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those faces appear again. By the time I made it to my apartment, I was convinced I was losing my mind. I double-checked every lock, drew all the curtains, and then curled up in bed, leaving every light in the place blazing. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with nightmares. I dreamed of endless subway rides, of faces melting and reforming, of voices speaking in unison, telling me I had been chosen. I woke with a start, sunlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. For a blissful moment, I thought it had all been a bad dream. Then I saw the note on my nightstand. In handwriting that was eerily similar to my own, it read, "The Watchers never sleep. The Watchers never stop. You are one of us now. Resistance is futile." As I stared at the note, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Monday, commute to work. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that they would be waiting for me. They would always be waiting for me. Because now, I was one of them. A watcher. Destined to stand forever in that subway car. Watching, waiting for the next chosen one. I looked in the mirror, and for a split second, I saw not my own face, but a blank, featureless visage. The face of a watcher. The face of my future. Story 6. The first message seemed innocent enough. A simple friend request from someone I didn't know. But as the notifications kept coming, each one more personal than the last, I realized I wasn't dealing with a random stranger. This was someone who knew me, someone who was watching my every move, and they were always one step ahead. It started on a Tuesday evening. I remember because I'd just gotten home from a particularly grueling day at work, my feet aching from standing for hours in the ER. I'm a nurse, you see, and Tuesday had brought a multi-car pileup that kept us busy well past my shift's end. I kicked off my shoes, wincing as I peeled off my compression socks. The apartment was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of city traffic filtering through the windows. I padded to the kitchen, pulled a frozen dinner from the freezer, and popped it in the microwave. As I waited for my sad excuse for a meal to heat up, I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone. That's when I saw it. A Facebook notification. New friend request from Alex Carpenter. I frowned, not recognizing the name. The profile picture was blurry, showing what looked like a man with dark hair, but it was hard to make out any details. Probably just another random request, I thought. I got them sometimes, usually from bots or people trying to sell something. I was about to ignore it when curiosity got the better of me. I tapped on the profile, but it was mostly private. The only public post was from earlier that day. New beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. Something about the quote made me pause. I'd just gone through a messy breakup a few months ago. Was this some kind of sign? The microwave beeped, startling me out of my thoughts. I shook my head, chuckling at my own foolishness. It was just a coincidence, nothing more. I declined the request and went to eat my dinner. The next morning, I woke to another notification. This time, it was an Instagram follow request from AC_newbeginnings. The profile picture was different. A sunset over water, but something about it nagged at me. I opened the profile and felt a chill run down my spine. There was only one post, a picture of the coffee shop across from my apartment building. The caption read, "The best part of waking up is watching the world come alive. Right, Sarah." Sarah, my name. How did they know my name? My hands shook as I declined the request and blocked the account. This was weird, too weird to be a coincidence. But it had to be, right? Maybe it was just some local account trying to gain followers. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling as I got ready for work. But as I left my building, I couldn't help scanning the coffee shop across the street, wondering if someone was watching me. The day at the hospital was busy, which I was grateful for. It kept my mind off the strange social media encounters. By the time my shift ended, I'd almost forgotten about it. Almost. As I walked to my car in the hospital parking garage, my phone buzzed. A new email notification. The subject line made my blood run cold. "You look tired today, Sarah. Rough shift?" I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them as I rushed to unlock my car. Once inside, I locked the doors and took a deep breath before opening the email. It was from an address I didn't recognize, AC. watching@gmail.com. The body of the email was short. "I saw you helping that little boy with the broken arm today. You're so good with kids. It's a shame you and Tom never had any of your own. But then again, he never deserved you, did he?" My vision blurred as panic set in. Tom, my ex. We'd broken up because he didn't want kids, and I did. But I'd never posted about that online. Never told anyone but my closest friends. With trembling fingers, I deleted the email and blocked the address. Then I sat in my car for a long time, jumping at every sound, before I finally worked up the courage to drive home. That night, I double-checked all my locks and drew all the curtains. I even considered calling the police, but what would I say? Someone was sending me creepy messages online. They'd probably tell me to just block them and be done with it. I barely slept, tossing and turning, imagining eyes watching me from every dark corner. When my alarm went off the next morning, I seriously considered calling in sick. But no, I couldn't let this person, whoever they were, disrupt my life. As I got ready for work, I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting more messages. But there was nothing. Maybe it was over. Maybe they'd gotten bored and moved on. That fragile hope was shattered the moment I stepped out of my building. There, taped to the front door, was a Polaroid picture. My heart nearly stopped when I saw what it showed. Me, asleep in my bed, taken through my bedroom window. Scrawled on the white space below the image were the words, "Sleep well, princess." I ripped the photo down, looking wildly around the street. But there was no one suspicious, just the usual morning crowd hurrying to work or school. I ran back inside, my whole body shaking. This time, I did call the police. But as I tried to explain the situation to the bored-sounding dispatcher, I realized how crazy it all sounded. Social media requests, cryptic emails, and now a photo that I had no proof wasn't taken by me. "Ma'am," the dispatcher said, not even trying to hide her skepticism, "unless you have concrete evidence of a threat, there's not much we can do. I suggest you increase your security measures and document any further incidents." I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. I called in sick to work, then spent the day pacing my apartment, jumping at every sound. I checked every window, taped cardboard over the ones in my bedroom. I changed every password I could think of, triple-checked my privacy settings on all my accounts. As night fell, I finally collapsed on my couch, exhausted but too wired to sleep. My phone lay silent on the coffee table. I stared at it, almost willing it to buzz, to give me some clue about what was happening. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. At exactly midnight, my phone lit up with a new text message. Unknown number. My hand shook as I picked it up. Look outside, Sarah. I left you a gift. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to call the police, to run and hide. But a morbid curiosity drove me to the window. I peeled back the edge of the curtain, peering out into the dark street below. There, on the sidewalk, directly in front of my building, was a small box wrapped in shiny red paper. A gift, just like the message said. I don't know what possessed me to go down there. Maybe I thought if I'd confronted this thing head-on, it would end. Maybe I was just tired of being afraid. The night air was cool on my skin as I stepped outside. The street was deserted, eerily quiet for New York. I approached the box slowly, half expecting it to explode or something equally dramatic. But when I picked it up, it was light, making a soft rustling sound as I shook it. With trembling fingers, I tore off the wrapping paper. Inside was a photo album. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it. The first page showed a picture of me as a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, playing in a sandbox. I recognized the park near my childhood home. I flipped through the pages with growing horror. There I was at my high school graduation, my college dorm room, my first apartment. Moments from my entire life, many of which I didn't even remember. All captured in perfect detail. The last page held a single photo. It showed me standing on the sidewalk, holding the very album I was looking at. The time stamp in the corner read 0:07, 7 minutes past midnight. Right now, I dropped the album and spun around, my eyes frantically searching the darkness. And there, across the street, I saw a figure step out of the shadows. Even from this distance, I could see the glint of a camera lens. As I watched, frozen in terror, the figure raised a hand and waved. Then, in a voice that sounded disturbingly familiar, they called out, "Hello, Sarah. It's so nice to finally meet you in person. We have so much to talk about." And as they stepped into the glow of a streetlight, I felt the world tilt sideways. Because the face smiling at me, the face behind all of this, was my own. Story 7. The first night, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. The second night, I told myself it was the building settling. But by the third night, when I saw that chair move across the room with my own eyes, I knew I wasn't alone in this godforsaken facility. And whatever was in here with me, it was angry. I never wanted this job. Night security at some remote research facility in the middle of nowhere. Not exactly my dream gig, but beggars can't be choosers, and after getting laid off from my cozy office job, I was definitely begging. The facility itself was weird. All sleek metal and glass on the outside, but inside it was a maze of stark white corridors and unmarked doors. They didn't tell me what kind of research went on here, and honestly, I didn't want to know. My job was simple: make my rounds, check the security cameras, and make sure nobody broke in or out. That first night started normally enough. I arrived at 10 p.m, got my briefing from the day shift guy, who couldn't seem to get out of there fast enough, and settled in at the security desk. The bank of monitors in front of me showed empty hallways, locked doors, and the occasional blinking light from some piece of equipment I couldn't even begin to understand. I did my first round at midnight. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the walls as I walked the corridors, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears strain for any sound, no matter how small. It was during my 2 a.m. round that I first noticed something off. I was passing by one of the labs. a big room full of complicated-looking machinery. When I saw it, a chair, one of those wheeled office chairs, slowly rotating in the middle of the room. I froze, my flashlight beam fixed on the chair. It was barely moving, just a slight turn that you might not even notice if you weren't looking directly at it. But in the stillness of the facility, it might as well have been spinning like a top. "Hello," I called out, immediately feeling foolish. Of course, no one answered. I was the only one here. I checked the room thoroughly, but found nothing out of place. No open windows. Not that there were any windows in this underground labyrinth. No vents blowing air that might have moved the chair. I told myself it must have just been slowly settling after someone left it spinning earlier in the day. But as I continued my round, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The rest of the night passed without incident, and by the time the day shift arrived, I had almost convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing. The second night started much like the first. Quiet, uneventful, boring, even, until about 1 a.m. I was watching the security feeds when I saw a flicker of movement on one of the screens. It was quick, just a shadow passing across the edge of the frame, but it was enough to send my heart racing. I rewound the footage, watching it over and over. There, in the corner of Lab 3, something dark moved across the screen. It was blurry, indistinct. Could have been a person. Could have been something else. I grabbed my flashlight and practically ran to Lab 3. But when I got there, the room was empty. Not a thing out of place. I spent the next hour combing through that lab, looking for any sign of an intruder. Nothing. As I was about to leave, defeated and questioning my sanity, I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. The chair. The same damn chair from last night. It had moved from its spot by the desk to the center of the room. I backed out of the lab slowly, my eyes never leaving that chair. As soon as I was in the hallway, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, my heart pounding. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. "It's just a chair. Chairs don't move on their own." But deep down, I knew something wasn't right in this place. The third night, I came prepared. I'd brought extra batteries for my flashlight, a personal camera to document anything weird, and enough coffee to keep me wired all night. I was determined to get to the bottom of whatever was going on. The first few hours were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like it's building up to something. I found myself jumping at every little sound. The hum of the air conditioning, the occasional beep from some distant machine. At midnight, I started my first round. Everything seemed normal at first. Empty hallways, locked doors, the usual. But as I approached Lab 3, that uneasy feeling in my gut intensified. I paused outside the door, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glow of a few standby lights on the equipment. And there, in the center of the room, was that damn chair. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam fixed on the chair. It sat there, innocuous, as if daring me to look away. So I didn't. I stood there, staring at it, willing it to move. Minutes ticked by. My arm was getting tired from holding up the flashlight. Just as I was about to give up and continue my round, it happened. The chair moved. Not much, just a slight turn to the left. But I saw it, clear as day. "Holy sh!" I started to say, but the word died in my throat as the chair suddenly spun around to face me. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. The chair started to move towards me, its wheels squeaking slightly on the polished floor. "This isn't real," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. This can't be real. When I opened them again, the chair was inches from my feet. And it wasn't alone. All around the room, other objects were moving. Pens rolling across desks, papers floating through the air, computer screens flickering to life. And then I heard it. A voice, if you could call it that. It was like 1,000 whispers, all at once, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You don't belong here," it said. "This is our place now." I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Through the winding corridors, up the stairs, not stopping until I'd burst out of the facility's main doors into the cool night air. As I stood there, gasping for breath, I looked back at the building. It stood there, silent and dark, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better now. I'd like to say I quit on the spot, that I never went back into that hellish place. But the truth is, I couldn't. Not right away, because now I had questions. What was happening in there? What were they researching that could cause whatever that was? So I went back. Night after night, I went back. And each night, things got stranger. Objects moving on their own became common. Whispers in empty rooms. Shadows where there should be none. But I kept at it, documenting everything, trying to make sense of it all. Until the night I saw it, the thing behind it all. It was during my 3 a.m. round. I was passing by the main lab when I heard a crash. I rushed in, flashlight at the ready, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was everything. The air itself seemed to warp and twist, forming shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. Colors I'd never seen before swelled in the air. And in the center of it all, something that might have once been human, but wasn't anymore. It turned to look at me, and I felt my mind start to unravel. In that moment, I understood. The research here, it had torn a hole in reality itself. And now, whatever was on the other side was coming through. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in the hospital a week later, babbling about impossible things. They said I had a mental breakdown, that I'd imagined it all. But I know the truth. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear those whispers again, calling me back, telling me that it's not over, that it's only just begun. And the scariest part of me wants to answer that call, because now I know there are things out there just beyond the veil of our reality, and they're waiting for us to let them in. Story 8. The moment we stepped into that Airbnb, I knew something was off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a feeling, a slight chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. But as the weekend wore on and the strange occurrences piled up, I realized we weren't alone in that secluded cabin. And whatever was in there with us, it didn't want us to leave. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Just me and Sarah, escaping the city for a long weekend to celebrate our 3rd anniversary. We'd found the place online, a quaint log cabin nestled in the woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. The photos showed a cozy interior with a stone fireplace, a clawfoot tub, and a porch swing overlooking the serene lake. It looked perfect. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. The gravel driveway crunched under our tires as we pulled up to the cabin. It looked just like the pictures, maybe a bit more weathered, but charming in its rustic way. "Home sweet home for the next 3 days," Sarah said, giving my hand a squeeze as we got out of the car. I grabbed our bags from the trunk, while Sarah went to unlock the front door. As I approached the porch, I noticed her frowning at the keypad. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just..." She punched in the code again. There we go. It was acting weird for a second. The door swung open with a low creak. I followed Sarah inside, my arms laden with our luggage. The interior was dim, lit only by the fading daylight filtering through the windows. Sarah fumbled for a light switch while I set our bags down. "Wow, it's musty in here," she said, wrinkling her nose. She wasn't wrong. The air inside was heavy, with an odd, almost metallic scent underneath the expected woodsy smell. I chalked it up to the place being closed up for a while and moved to open some windows. As I reached for the latch on the nearest window, something caught my eye. There, on the sill, was a single perfect handprint in the dust. It was small, like a child's. "Hey, Sarah," I called out. Did the listing say anything about the owners having kids? No. Why? I turned to answer her, but the words died in my throat. The handprint was gone. The windowsill was clean, not a speck of dust in sight. I blinked hard, shaking my head. Never mind. Must have imagined it. We spent the next hour unpacking and settling in. By the time we'd finished, night had fallen completely. Sarah suggested we'd build a fire and open a bottle of wine. It sounded perfect. As I knelt by the fireplace, arranging logs and kindling, I felt a sudden draft. Cold air brushed the back of my neck, raising goosebumps on my skin. I turned, expecting to see an open window, but everything was shut tight. "Did you feel that?" I asked Sarah, who was in the kitchen, opening the wine. "Feel what? Nothing, I guess. Just a chill." The fire caught quickly, filling the room with warm, flickering light. We curled up on the couch with our wine, and for a while, everything felt normal. Cozy, even. We talked about work, about our plans for the weekend, about maybe getting a dog when we got back to the city. It wasn't until later, when we were getting ready for bed, that things started to get weird again. I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, when I heard Sarah call out from the bedroom. "Babe, did you unpack the extra blanket?" I gargled and spit before answering. "Yeah, I put it in the closet." "Why, it's freezing in here suddenly. Like, ice cold." I frowned. The bathroom was perfectly comfortable. I stepped into the bedroom and immediately felt it a pocket of frigid air, centered right around our bed. Sarah was huddled under the comforter, her breath visible in little puffs. "What the hell?" she said, her teeth chattering slightly. I moved to check the window, but it was sealed tight. No drafts, no cracks. The cold seemed to be coming from nowhere. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The room returned to a normal temperature in the span of a heartbeat. Sarah and I exchanged bewildered looks. "Okay, that was weird," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Old houses, you know? Probably just some quirk with the heating system." Single quote, Sarah nodded, but I could see the unease in her eyes. It mirrored my own. We went to bed shortly after, both of us a little on edge. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the cabin settling. Just as I was finally drifting off, a sound jolted me back to full alertness. Footsteps, coming from the floor above us. I sat up, my heart pounding. Sarah stirred beside me. "What's wrong?" She mumbled sleepily. I whispered. "Listen." We both held our breath, straining our ears. There it was, again, the unmistakable sound of someone walking around upstairs. Sarah clutched my arm. "There's an upstairs," she whispered. I shook my head. "I don't think so. We didn't see any stairs, did we?" The footsteps continued, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. They were slow, deliberate, like whoever or whatever was up there knew we were listening. I reached for my phone, ready to call. Someone, the police, the Airbnb host. But as soon as I touched it, the screen lit up with a notification. New text message from unknown number. Enjoying your stay? I showed it to Sarah, whose face had gone pale. That's not funny, she said, her voice shaky. Another message popped up. We hope you'll stay forever. That was it. We were out of there. We scrambled out of bed, throwing on clothes and shoving things into our bags haphazardly. The whole time, the footsteps continued overhead, perfectly in sync with our frantic movements. As I zipped up my bag, I noticed something on the bedside table that hadn't been there before. A photograph. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It showed Sarah and me asleep in the very bed we'd just leaped out of. The time stamp in the corner read 2:37 a.m. It was currently 2:39 a.m. We need to go. Now, I said, shoving the photo into my pocket. We ran for the front door, our bags banging against our legs. I reached for the handle, but it wouldn't turn. Locked. I punched in the code on the keypad. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Move, Sarah said, pushing past me. She entered the code. The door remained stubbornly shut. And then, from behind us, came a voice. A child's voice, sweet and clear. Why are you leaving? Don't you want to play with us? We turned slowly, clinging to each other. There, at the end of the hallway, stood a little girl. She was pale, almost translucent in the moonlight streaming through the window. Her eyes were dark hollows, her smile too wide for her face. It's been so long since we had visitors, she said, taking a step towards us. So very long. As she moved, I saw others behind her. Shadowy figures, some tall, some small, all with those same hollow eyes. They began to advance, their movements jerky and unnatural. Sarah screamed. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was throwing myself against the door, shoulder first. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th impact, it burst open. We tumbled out onto the porch, scrambling to our feet and running for the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. As we peeled out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin stood dark and silent, no sign of the horrors we'd just fled. But there, in the upstairs window, the window that shouldn't have existed, I saw a small hand waving goodbye. We drove through the night, not stopping until we were back in the familiar lights of the city. We never spoke about that weekend again, at least not to each other. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up to find Sarah staring out the window, a haunted look in her eyes. And on my phone, no matter how many times I block the number, I still get the occasional message. We're waiting for you to come back. We'll always be waiting. Single quote, story 9. The first voicemail was innocuous enough. The second made me uneasy. By the third, I knew I was in trouble. But it wasn't until the final message that I realized the calls weren't just coming from an unknown number. They were coming from an unknown time. It started on a Tuesday evening. I remember because I'd just gotten home from my weekly pottery class, my hands still caked with dried clay. The apartment was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sounds of traffic 11 stories below. I kicked off my shoes, wiggled my toes in the plush carpet, and headed for the shower. As I was toweling off, I heard the muffled ping of my phone from the bedroom. Probably just a text from Mum, I thought. She always forgot about the time difference between New York and California. Wrapping the towel around myself, I padded into the bedroom. The phone's screen glowed in the dimness, announcing one new voicemail. No missed call though. Weird. I hit play, holding the phone to my ear. At first, There was nothing but static, a soft hiss punctuated by what sounded like distant voices. Then, clear as day, a man's voice. "Hello, is anyone there?" The message ended. I frowned, pulling the phone away to check the number. Unknown. Probably a wrong number or a glitch in the system. I deleted the message and thought nothing more of it. The next morning, I woke to another voicemail notification. Same deal. No missed call, unknown number. This time, when I played it, the static was louder, the background voices more distinct. I could almost make out words, like listening to a radio stuck between stations. Then, that same man's voice, more urgent now. "Please, if you can hear me, I need help. I don't know where I am." A chill ran down my spine. Something about his tone, the raw fear in his voice, made my stomach clench. This didn't feel like a prank or a marketing ploy. This felt real. I saved the message this time, then got ready for work, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. But as I rode the subway downtown, my mind kept drifting back to that voice. Who was he? What kind of trouble was he in? The day dragged on, each tick of the clock seeming to take an eternity. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, half expecting, half hoping, to see another message. But there was nothing. It wasn't until I was home that evening, microwaving a sad, frozen dinner, that the third voicemail came. This time, I pounced on the phone, my heart racing as I hit play. The static was even louder now. The background noise a cacophony of indistinct shouts and what sounded like alarms. The man's voice cut through it all, breathless and terrified. "Listen, I don't have much time. They're coming. I don't know how I'm reaching you, but you're my only hope. Please, you have to." The message cut off abruptly. My hands were shaking as I lowered the phone. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate hoax. But the fear in that man's voice, it sounded so genuine. I tried calling the number back, but got an automated message saying it wasn't in service. I googled the area code -202, Washington, D.I.C., but found nothing unusual in the news. No reports of missing persons or mysterious disturbances. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, my mind conjuring up increasingly bizarre scenarios. Who was this man? What kind of danger was he in? And why me? Why was I getting these messages? The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus on spreadsheets and client meetings, not with this mystery consuming my thoughts. Instead, I spent the day researching, trying to find any clue that might explain what was happening. I dug into the history of my phone number, wondering if perhaps it had belonged to someone else before me, someone this man was trying to reach. But I'd had the same number for years, ever since I moved to New York after college. I looked into stories of phone scams and elaborate pranks, but nothing I found came close to matching this situation. The more I searched, the more I became convinced that something truly strange was happening. As evening approached, I found myself sitting on my couch, staring at my phone, waiting. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting my living room in shades of orange and purple. And then, as if on cue, the phone buzzed. One new voicemail. My hand trembled as I raised the phone to my ear. This time, there was no static, no background noise, just crystal clear silence, and then his voice. "Sarah, Sarah, is that you?" I nearly dropped the phone. That was my name. He knew my name. "Sarah, listen carefully," he continued. "I don't know how this is possible, but somehow I'm calling you from the future, from your future. Things have gone very wrong here, Sarah. The world, it's not the same. There's been a catastrophe, And I think you might be the only one who can stop it. My mind reeled. This couldn't be real. Time travel, future catastrophes. It was insane. And yet, I know this sounds crazy, he said, as if reading my thoughts. But I can prove it. On your left wrist, you have a small scar from when you fell off your bike when you were 8. You've never told anyone how you really got it because you're embarrassed that you were trying to impress Tommy Schultz by riding with no hands. I looked down at my wrist, at the small white scar I usually forgot was even there. My blood ran cold. There was no way he could know that. No way, Sar. Listen. In 3 days, on Friday, you're going to get a call from an old college friend. She's going to invite you to a party. You can't go to that party, Sarah. Whatever you do, don't go. That's where it all starts. That's the catalyst for everything that happens. The message ended abruptly, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I'd just heard. It was impossible. It had to be. And yet, the next 2 days passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I jumped at every sound, flinched every time my phone so much as vibrated. But there were no more messages. Friday dawned bright and clear. I'd called in sick to work again, unable to face the normalcy of the office with this weight hanging over me. As the day wore on, I found myself staring at the phone, willing it to ring and simultaneously dreading the moment it would. At 3:17 p.m., it happened. The phone buzzed, an incoming call from a number I hadn't seen in years. With a shaking hand, I answered. Sarah, hey, it's Melissa from college. Long time no talk. I listened in a daze as she chatted, my heart pounding so loud I was sure she must be able to hear it through the phone. And then, there it was. So, I'm having this party tonight, kind of a reunion thing. I know it's last minute, but I'd love it if you could come. Time seemed to stand still. In that moment, I saw 2 paths stretching out before me. In one, I said yes. I went to the party, set in motion whatever chain of events led to that terrifying future. In the other, I'm sorry, Mel, I heard myself say. I'm not feeling well. I think I'll have to pass. There was a pause, just a beat too long. And then, oh okay, no worries. Maybe next time. As I hung up, I could have sworn I heard something in her voice. Disappointment, relief, or something else entirely. That night, as I sat in my darkened apartment, jumping at every shadow, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just changed the course of history. For better or for worse, I didn't know. My phone sat silent on the coffee table. No more messages from the future. No more warnings. Just the weight of a choice I'd made, and the endless questions about what might have been. As the first light of dawn crept through my windows, I realized something. The future, my future, was unwritten now. Whatever that man from the voicemails had been warning me about, I'd avoided it. Or had I, maybe this was always how it was supposed to happen. Maybe his warnings were what ensured I wouldn't go to that party. The lines between cause and effect, between past and future, had never felt so blurred. And as I sat there, watching the sun rise on a new day, I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey, our journey, was only just beginning. Story 10. I never thought an elevator ride could change my life. But as the doors closed, trapping me with a stranger who seemed to know everything about me, I realized that sometimes our darkest fears are closer than we think. And sometimes, they wear a familiar face. It was a Tuesday morning, just another day at Grayson & Partners, the advertising firm where I'd worked for the past 5 years. I hurried through the lobby, balancing a cardboard tray with 2 coffees. One for me, one for my boss. The autumn air outside had been crisp, but inside the building, it was almost stiflingly warm. I nodded to the security guard as I passed, noticing the way his eyes lingered a little too long. Was there something on my face? I made a mental note to check my makeup when I got to my desk. The elevator bank was crowded, as usual for 8:45 a.m. I squeezed in just as the doors were closing, mumbling apologies as I jostled for space. As we ascended, the car gradually emptied, people filing out at their respective floors. By the time we reached the 20th floor, only 2 of us remained. Me and a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well dressed in a charcoal suit that looked expensive, even to my untrained eye. His hair was dark, peppered with grey at the temples. As I snuck a glance at him, he turned and smiled. Something about that smile made my stomach clench. "Long day ahead, Sarah?" he asked, nodding at the coffee tray in my hands. I blinked, taken aback. How did he know my name? "I'm sorry," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Do I know you?" He chuckled, a warm sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, I think we know each other quite well, Sarah. Or at least, I know you." A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the elevator. I glanced at the floor indicator. 23. 24. Why was this ride taking so long? "I'm sorry," I said again, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "I think you must have me confused with someone else." His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, I don't think so. Sarah Elizabeth Cooper, born September 3rd, 1990, in Millbrook, New York. Graduated from Vassar in 2012 with a degree in communications. You've worked at Grayson and Partners for 5 years, 2 months, and, let's see, 17 days. How am I doing so far?" My heart was pounding now, blood rushing in my ears. How could he possibly know all that? "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What do you want?" He skaked, shaking his head. Now, Sarah. Don't be rude. We're just having a friendly conversation. Tell me, how's your mother doing? Still battling that pesky drinking problem?" I felt like I'd been slapped. My mother's struggle with alcohol was a closely guarded secret, something I'd never even told my closest friends at work. "I don't know who you are," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But you need to stop, now." He laughed, the sound echoing off the elevator walls. "Oh, Sarah. Sweet, naive Sarah. I'm not going to stop. I'm just getting started." I glanced desperately at the floor indicator again. 31, 32. We had to be almost there. Just a few more floors and I could escape this nightmare. "You know," he continued, his voice conversational, as if we were discussing the weather, "I've always wondered about that scar on your left hip. The one you got when you were 16. Car accident, wasn't it? Or was it?" My breath caught in my throat. The scar, a thin, white line just above my hip bone, was from a car accident. At least, that's what I'd always told people. But the truth was something I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't real. "How?" I started, but my voice failed me. "How do I know?" He finished for me. "Oh, Sarah. I know everything about you. Every secret, every lie, every dark little thought you've ever had. I know about the time you stole money from your roommate's purse in college. I know about the married man you had an affair with last year. I even know about that thing you did when you were 12. The thing you've never told anyone about. Not even your therapist." Tears were streaming down my face now. I couldn't breathe. The elevator felt like it was closing in around me. "Please," I gasped. Please, just tell me what you want." His smile disappeared, replaced by a look of such intensity that I stumbled back, my shoulder blades pressing against the cool metal wall of the elevator. "What I want, Sarah," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "is for you to wake up, to see the truth." "What truth?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He stepped closer, so close I could smell his cologne, a scent that was oddly familiar. "The truth about who you really are, about what you're capable of." The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open. I'd never been so relieved to see the 35th floor in my life. I moved to step out, but his hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "You can't run from this, Sarah," he said. "You can't run from yourself." I yanked my arm free, stumbling out of the elevator. As I turned back, my eyes wide with fear, I saw something that made my blood run cold. His face was changing, melting, shifting, reforming. And what I saw emerging was me. An older version of me, with lines around the eyes and grey streaking the hair, but unmistakably my own face. The doors began to close. The last thing I saw was my own eyes staring back at me, filled with a mixture of pity and anticipation. "See you soon, Sarah," my own voice called out as the doors shut. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the coffee tray trembling in my hands. Around me, the office buzzed with its usual morning activity. People chattered by the water cooler, phones rang, keyboards clacked. Everything was normal, except nothing would ever be normal again. I made it to my desk somehow, setting down the Norcold coffees with shaking hands. My co-worker, Amy, looked up from her computer. "You okay, Sarah?" she asked, concern etching her features. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, the sound brittle and false. "Just a weird morning," I said. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. Not even close. The day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, attending meetings, answering emails, all while my mind raced. Who was that man? How did he know those things about me? And that face at the end? Was I hallucinating? By the time 5 p.m. rolled around, I was a wreck. I practically ran out of the office, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. No way was I getting in one of those metal boxes again anytime soon. The crisp evening air hit me like a slap as I burst out of the building. I gulped it down, trying to clear my head. As I started walking towards the subway, a thought struck me. What if he was waiting for me there, too? Panic rising in my throat, I flagged down a cab instead. As we merged into traffic, I slumped in the back seat, exhaustion washing over me. "Rough day?" the cabbie asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Don't worry," he said, his voice oddly familiar. "It'll all make sense soon." My head snapped up, eyes widening in horror. In the mirror, I saw my own face staring back at me, that same pitying smile playing on its lips. "No," I whispered. "This can't be happening." "Oh, but it is, Sarah," my own voice replied. "And it's only just beginning." As the cab sped through the darkening city streets, I realized that my nightmare was far from over. It was following me, wearing my face, knowing my secrets. And I had a sinking feeling that no matter where I ran, no matter where I hid, it would always find me. Because how do you escape yourself? Story 11. I never thought I'd find something worse than a dead body in my best friend's house. But as I stared at the tiny camera hidden in the bathroom vent, I realized that sometimes the living are far more terrifying than the dead. And the person I thought I knew better than anyone might be a stranger after all. It all started innocently enough. Jake, My best friend since college had asked me to house sit for him while he was on a 2-week business trip to Tokyo. Just water the plants, grab the mail, make sure the place doesn't burn down, he'd said with that easy grin of his. Oh, and feel free to raid the fridge. I stocked up on your favorite beer. That was Jake for you. Always thoughtful, always generous. We'd been through thick and thin together, cramming for finals, celebrating job offers, mourning breakups. I thought I knew everything about him. Boy, was I wrong. The first few days were uneventful. Jake's place was a sleek 1-bedroom apartment in a renovated brownstone, all hardwood floors and exposed brick. It was a far cry from my cramped studio, and I found myself enjoying the luxury of space. It was on the 4th day that things started to get weird. I was taking a shower, letting the hot water ease the knots in my shoulders from hunching over my laptop all day. As I reached for the shampoo, something caught my eye. A glint of metal in the vent above the toilet. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped out of the shower, water dripping onto the tile floor, and stood on tiptoe to peer into the vent. That's when I saw it. A tiny camera, no bigger than a button, its lens pointed directly at the shower. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet floor. A camera in Jake's bathroom. Why would he? No, there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was for security, but in the bathroom, that didn't make any sense. With trembling hands, I wrapped a towel around myself and started searching the rest of the apartment. Now that I knew what to look for, I found them everywhere. In the living room bookshelf, hidden among the knickknacks on the mantel, even one in the kitchen disguised as a smoke detector. My mind was reeling. This wasn't the Jake I knew. The Jake I knew was kind, funny, a bit of a neat freak, but otherwise normal. He wasn't this. Whatever this was. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. What was I supposed to do now? Call the police? Or what would I tell them? That my best friend, who had no criminal record and was by all accounts a model citizen, had hidden cameras in his own home. As I sat there, trying to make sense of it all, my eyes fell on Jake's laptop, sitting innocently on the coffee table. Maybe there were answers there. I hesitated for a moment. This was a huge invasion of privacy. But then again, so were hidden cameras in the bathroom. Taking a deep breath, I opened the laptop. The screen flared to life, asking for a password. I tried the usual suspects. His birthday, his mum's name, even the name of his childhood dog. Nothing worked. Then, on a hunch, I typed in my own name. The screen unlocked. What I found made me wish I'd never looked. Folders upon folders of video files, all neatly labeled with dates and names. Some I recognized. Mutual friends, Jake's ex-girlfriends. Others were strangers to me. With a growing sense of dread, I clicked on one. The video showed Jake's living room, the very room I was sitting in. A woman I didn't recognize was on the couch, laughing at something off camera. Then Jake entered the frame, 2 wine glasses in hand. They talked, they flirted, and then I slammed the laptop shut, feeling sick to my stomach. This was wrong. All of it was so wrong. But it got worse. As I sat there, trying to process what I'd seen, I heard a noise. A faint click, like a key in a lock. Footsteps in the hallway. Jake wasn't supposed to be back for another week. Panic seized me. I looked around wildly, searching for a place to hide, but it was too late. The door swung open, and there he was. Jake stood in the doorway, his usual friendly smile plastered on his face. But his eyes were cold, calculating. Nothing like the warm gaze I was used to. "Alex," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I wasn't expecting you to still be here." I stood up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Jake," I managed to croak out. "You're back early." He stepped into the apartment, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. "Flight got cancelled," he said, shrugging off his jacket. "Thought I'd surprise you." "Surprise me?" "Right." I glanced at the laptop, then back at Jake. Did he know I'd seen? Could he tell? "Is everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing in what looked like genuine concern. "You look pale." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I say? "Hey Jake, I found your hidden cameras in your creepy video collection." "What's up with that?" Instead, I heard myself say, "Just feeling a bit under the weather. I think I might head home." Jake's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "You sure? I could make some soup. We could catch up." "No," I said, too quickly. "I mean, no thanks. I should really get going." I moved towards the door, but Jake was faster. He stepped in front of it, effectively blocking my exit. "Alex," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What did you see?" The facade was crumbling now. Gone was the friendly smile, replaced by something cold and hard. This wasn't my best friend anymore. This was a stranger wearing Jake's face. "Nothing," I lied, my voice shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Oh, Alex, I really wish I could believe that." What happened next was a blur. I remember trying to push past him, remember his hand gripping my arm with bruising force. I remember the sharp sting of a needle in my neck, and then darkness. When I came to, I was tied to a chair in Jake's bedroom. The room spun as I lifted my head, nausea washing over me. Through blurry vision, I could see Jake sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You weren't supposed to find out," he said quietly. "Not like this." I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick and unwieldy in my mouth. Jake stood up, pacing the room. "You don't understand, Alex. I had to do it. I had to know. People lie, they hide things. But the cameras see everything." He turned to me, his eyes feverish. "Don't you see? I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just trying to uncover the truth." As my vision cleared, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A red light blinking steadily from the corner of the room. We were being recorded. "Jake," I managed to croak out. "Please, this isn't you. Let me go, and we can forget this ever happened." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Forget? Oh no, Alex. We're just getting started. You're going to help me. Together, we'll uncover everyone's secrets. No more lies, no more deception." As he spoke, he moved closer until his face was inches from mine. I could see the madness in his eyes now, the paranoia that had consumed the friend I once knew. "What do you say, Alex?" he whispered, ready to see the truth. In that moment, I realized that the Jake I knew was gone. In his place was something I didn't recognize. And as the camera blinked its steady red eye, I knew that my own story was far from over. Because in Jake's world of hidden cameras and secret recordings, everyone was guilty until proven innocent. And I had a sinking feeling that innocence was in very short supply. Story 12. The first time I saw my doppelganger, I thought it was a trick of the light. The second time, I convinced myself it was just a strange coincidence. But by the third time, when I locked eyes with my own face across a crowded street, I knew something was terribly wrong. And I had a sinking feeling that only one of us was going to make it out of this alive. It all started on a dreary Tuesday morning. The kind of day where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or not, leaving everything in a hazy, grey limbo. I was running late for work, as usual, sprinting down the crowded sidewalk with a half-eaten bagel in one hand and my phone in the other. As I waited at a crosswalk, tapping my foot impatiently, I glanced at my reflection in a store window. And that's when I saw it. For just a split second, my reflection didn't match my movements. It turned its head when I didn't, a curious expression on its face that I definitely wasn't making. I blinked hard, and everything was normal again. My reflection mimicked me perfectly as I raised a hand to rub my eyes. "Get it together, Jess," I muttered to myself. "This is what happens when you stay up until 3 a.m., binge-watching true crime documentaries." The light changed, and I hurried across the street, pushing the odd occurrence to the back of my mind. I had bigger things to worry about, like the presentation I was already 10 minutes late for. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings, deadlines, and too much coffee. By Friday, I'd almost forgotten about the strange reflection. Almost. I was at my favorite bar, unwinding after a long week with my best friend, Mia. The place was packed, the air thick with the smell of beer and the sound of 100 conversations happening at once. "I'm just saying," Mia was shouting over the noise. "You need to get back out there. It's been 6 months since Tom. You can't let one bad breakup ruin your love life forever." I rolled my eyes, taking a swig of my beer. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm just taking a break." Mia opened her mouth to argue, but her eyes suddenly widened, focusing on something over my shoulder. "Whoa, Jess, don't look now, but I think I just found your twin." Of course, I immediately turned to look. And there, across the crowded bar, was me. Same shoulder-length brown hair, same green eyes, same small scar on the chin from a childhood bike accident. She was even wearing an outfit eerily similar to mine. Jeans and a black top. Our eyes met, and I felt a jolt of something, recognition, fear, before I could process it. Someone walked between us, breaking our eye contact. When they moved, she was gone. I whirled back to Mia, my heart pounding. "Did you see that? Where did she go?" Mia frowned, craning her neck to look around the bar. "See what? The girl who looked like you?" "I don't know. I lost sight of her when you turned around." "Weird coincidence, huh?" I nodded numbly, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the second time in a week I'd seen myself. What the hell was going on? The rest of the night passed in a haze. I kept scanning the crowd, looking for my double, but she never reappeared. Mia eventually gave up trying to engage me in conversation and headed home early, shooting me concerned looks as she left. I stayed at the bar until closing, nursing the same beer and jumping at every flash of brown hair or glimpse of green eyes. But I, never showed up again. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a sense of unease I couldn't shake. I barely slept, my dreams filled with endless reflections of myself, each one slightly different, slightly wrong. I dragged myself out of bed and to the bathroom, wincing at my pale reflection in the mirror. As I splashed water on my face, I found myself studying my reflection closely. Was that really me? How could I be sure? Shaking off the paranoid thoughts, I got dressed and headed out. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, the kind that usually had me itching to get outside and enjoy the sunshine. But today, the bright light and cheerful birdsong felt almost mocking. I wandered aimlessly, not really sure where I was going, but needing to be out of my apartment. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every storefront window, every car mirror seemed to hold the potential for another glimpse of her, me, whatever she was. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost missed it. But there, across the street, was a familiar figure. My heart nearly stopped as I realized what I was seeing. It was me, again. But this time, she wasn't just a fleeting glimpse or a trick of the light. She was solid, real, standing on the corner as if waiting for the light to change. Without thinking, I started to cross the street, ignoring the blaring horns of cars as I darted between them. I had to reach her, had to confront her, had to understand what was happening. But as I got closer, she turned and saw me. Our eyes met, and I saw my own fear and confusion mirrored back at me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, two identical women frozen in the middle of a busy New York street. Then she ran. I took off after her, my heart pounding in my ears. She was fast as me, weaving through the crowded sidewalk with an ease that spoke of familiarity. Of course, she knew these streets as well as I did. She was me. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Down side streets, through alleyways, always just a few steps apart. I was gasping for breath, a stitch burning on my side, but I couldn't stop. I had to catch her. I had to know. Finally, she turned down a dead-end alley. I skidded around the corner after her, triumphant. But the alley was empty. I stood there, panting, looking wildly around. Where could she have gone? There were no doors, no fire escapes, nowhere she could have hidden. As I turned to leave, defeated and more confused than ever, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, and there she was, stepping out from behind a dumpster I could have sworn wasn't there a moment ago. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaky. "What do you want?" She smiled, and it was my smile, but wrong somehow. Too wide, too knowing. "I think you know who I am, Jess. The question is, who are you?" I shook my head, backing away. "What are you talking about?" "I'm me. You're some kind of copy, or twin, or... I don't know. But you're not me." She laughed, the sound echoing off the alley walls. "Are you sure about that? How do you know you're the original? Maybe I'm the real Jessica Harper, and you're the copy." The world seemed to tilt sideways as I processed her words. She was right. How could I be sure? I had memories, a life, friends and family. But so did she, presumably. What made my claim to being real any more valid than hers? "This isn't possible," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "People don't just have exact doubles walking around. This isn't some sci-fi movie." She took a step closer, and I noticed for the first time that her eyes weren't quite right. They were my eyes, yes, but there was something off about them. Something hungry. "Oh, Jess," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "There's so much you don't understand about the world, about reality. But don't worry. You won't have to worry about it for much longer." She lunged at me then, her hands outstretched. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling hard on the concrete. As she loomed over me, I saw her form shimmer, like heat rising off hot pavement. For a moment, I saw something else behind the familiar face. Something ancient and hungry and very, very wrong. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat. And then, just like that, she was gone. Vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the alley. I scrambled to my feet, my whole body shaking. What had just happened? Was I losing my mind? As I stumbled out of the alley and onto the busy street, I caught my reflection in a store window. For a split second, I saw her. It, smiling back at me, that too wide grin full of promise and threat. I ran all the way home, locking the door behind me and drawing all the curtains. But as I sank onto my couch, trying to catch my breath, a terrible thought occurred to me. How could I be sure I was really me? What if I was the copy, the imposter, and didn't even know it? What if the real Jess was out there somewhere, living my life, while I was just a pale imitation? As the sun set outside my darkened apartment, I realized that my reality, my very identity, was slipping away, and I had no idea how to get it back. Story 13. The package arrived on a Tuesday, unmarked and unexpected. By Wednesday, I was finding pieces of my past I'd thought long lost. Come Friday, I was convinced the sender knew more about my life than I did. And by Saturday night, as I stared at the gun that had killed my father 20 years ago, I realized I was caught in a game where the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. It started innocently enough. A plain brown box, about the size of a shoebox, sitting on my front porch when I got home from work. No return address, no shipping label, just my name and address written in a neat, unfamiliar hand. I brought it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter while I went through my usual after-work routine. Kicking off my shoes, feeding the cat, pouring a glass of wine. It wasn't until I was halfway through microwaving a sad frozen dinner that I remembered the package. Curiosity piqued. I grabbed a knife and sliced through the packing tape. Inside, nestled in a bed of crumpled newspaper, was a small velvet pouch. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized it. It was the same kind of pouch my grandmother used to keep her jewelry in. With trembling fingers, I loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into my palm. A silver locket tumbled out, its chain tangled around my fingers. I gasped, nearly dropping it. This wasn't just any locket. It was my mother's, the one she'd lost when I was a child. I remembered her tears as she'd torn the house apart looking for it. Remembered how she'd never quite gotten over its disappearance. But how could this be here, in my hand, after all these years? I fumbled with the clasp, finally managing to open it. Inside was the photo I remembered. My parents on their wedding day, young and smiling and full of hope. But on the other side, where there had once been a picture of infant me, there was now a small folded piece of paper. Heart pounding, I unfolded it. In the same neat handwriting as the address on the box was a simple message. The past is never as lost as we think it is. More to come. I sank into a kitchen chair, the locket clutched tightly in my fist. This had to be some kind of mistake or a prank. But who would go to such lengths? Who even knew about this locket, let alone had access to it? The microwave beeped, startling me out of my thoughts. I ignored it, my appetite gone. Instead, I spent the evening examining every inch of the package, the pouch, the locket, searching for any clue about their origin. But there was nothing. Just the cryptic note and the piece of my history I'd thought was gone forever. I barely slept that night, my dreams filled with fragmented memories and shadowy figures, always just out of sight. When I woke the next morning, groggy and disoriented, I half convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But there on my nightstand sat the locket, glinting in the early morning light. I called in sick to work, unable to face the mundane reality of spreadsheets and meetings with this mystery hanging over me. Instead, I spent the day poring over old photo albums, calling distant relatives, even Googling my own family history. But I came up empty. No one had any idea where the locket might have come from. Just as I was about to give up and order a pizza, resigning myself to a night of Netflix and trying to forget about the whole thing, there was a knock at the door. My heart leaped into my throat. Was this my mysterious sender, finally revealing themselves? But when I opened the door, there was no one there. Just another package, identical to the first, sitting on my welcome mat. This time, I didn't hesitate. I snatched it up and tore it open right there in the hallway. Inside was a battered leather wallet, its edges worn smooth with age. I recognized it immediately. It was my father's, the one he'd been carrying the night he died. With shaking hands, I opened it. Everything was just as I remembered. His driver's license, a few crumpled bills, a faded photo of my mother. But tucked behind the photo was another note in that same neat handwriting. Not everything is as it seems. Keep looking. I spent the next 2 days in a frenzy, barely eating or sleeping, consumed by the mystery. More packages arrived, each containing some relic from my past. My great-grandfather's pocket watch, a book of poetry my first girlfriend had given me, even my childhood teddy bear, lost during a move when I was 10. And with each item came another cryptic note, each one hinting at some hidden truth, some secret waiting to be uncovered. The lies we tell ourselves are the hardest to unravel. Truth hides in the spaces between memories. What's buried isn't always dead. By Friday night, my apartment looked like a museum of my life. Artifacts from every stage of my existence spread out across every surface. I sat in the middle of it all, surrounded by pieces of my past, feeling more lost than ever. That's when the final package arrived. It was larger than the others, and heavier. My hands shook as I opened it, not sure if I was more excited or terrified to see what was inside. As I pulled back the flaps of the box, my breath caught in my throat. There, nestled in a bed of packing peanuts, was a gun. Not just any gun. I recognized it instantly from the police reports I'd read 100 times. It was the gun that had killed my father. A wave of nausea washed over me. This couldn't be real. That gun should be in a police evidence locker somewhere, not here in my living room. A small part of my brain screamed at me to call the cops, to report this. But a larger part needed to know why. Why was this happening? What did it all mean? With trembling fingers, I lifted the gun out of the box. It was heavier than I expected, the metal cold against my skin. Taped to the barrel was another note. This one was different from the others. Longer, more detailed. As I read it, I felt the world tilt sideways. The truth about your father's death was buried along with him. But not all graves stay sealed. If you want to know what really happened that night, come to the old boathouse at Crescent Lake. Come alone. Come armed. All will be revealed. My mind reeled. The official story was that my father had surprised a burglar, that he'd been shot in the ensuing struggle. It was a random act of violence, a tragic case of wrong place, wrong time. At least, that's what I'd always been told. But now I wasn't sure of anything. I spent hours debating what to do. Call the police, ignore the whole thing, and pretend none of this had ever happened. In the end, curiosity won out. I had to know. As I drove to Crescent Lake the next evening, the gun a heavy weight in my jacket pocket, I tried to prepare myself for whatever I might find, but nothing could have prepared me for the truth. The old boathouse loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. As I approached, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. My heart nearly stopped as they stepped into the light. It was my father. Older, grayer, but unmistakably him. The father I'd thought dead for 20 years, was standing in front of me, very much alive. "Hello, son," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered it. "We have a lot to talk about." As I stood there, frozen in shock, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life, my past, my very identity, was about to change. And I had a feeling that by the time this night was over, nothing would ever be the same again. Story 14. The first time I lost 5 minutes, I blamed it on fatigue. The second time, I convinced myself it was stress. But by the third time, when I found myself in a strange part of town with no memory of how I got there, I knew something was terribly wrong. And I had a sinking feeling that the person I was when time slipped away wasn't me at all. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always my busiest days at the advertising firm where I worked. I was in the middle of a pitch meeting, standing in front of a room full of executives when it happened. One moment, I was confidently explaining our new campaign for a line of eco-friendly cleaning products. The next, I was staring at a room full of confused and concerned faces. My mouth was open, but no words were coming out. The sleek presentation remote in my hand felt foreign, like I'd forgotten how to use it. "Alex, are you all right?" My boss, Sarah, was half-rising from her chair, her brow furrowed with concern. I blinked hard, shaking my head to clear it. Yes, sorry. Where was I? Sarah exchanged glances with the clients. "You were just about to show us the mock-ups for the billboard designs." But I hadn't been. I'd been at least 10 slides away from that part of the presentation. Somehow, in what felt like the blink of an eye, I'd jumped forward in time. I stumbled through the rest of the meeting, acutely aware of the whispers and concerned looks being thrown my way. As soon as it was over, I bolted for the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face and staring at my reflection in the mirror. My green eyes looked back at me, wide and frightened. Everything seemed normal, and yet, something felt off. Like I wasn't quite inhabiting my own skin properly. I chalked it up to stress and lack of sleep. I'd been pulling long hours lately, trying to land this account. It was just my brain's way of telling me to slow down. That had to be it. The second time it happened was 3 days later. I was at home, cooking dinner. One minute I was chopping onions, the pungent smell making my eyes water. The next, I was standing in front of the open refrigerator, a half-empty bottle of wine in my hand. The kitchen clock showed that 10 minutes had passed. The cutting board was clean, the onions nowhere to be seen. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the rich aroma of tomato sauce. I set the wine bottle down with a shaking hand, my mind racing. What had just happened? Had I really cooked an entire sauce in what felt like seconds to me? I spent the rest of the evening on edge, jumping at every little sound, convinced that at any moment I might blink and find myself somewhere else, someone else. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were fragmented and unsettling. I was running through endless corridors, chasing, or being chased by a shadowy figure that looked unsettlingly like myself. I woke up exhausted, my sheets tangled around my legs and damp with sweat. As I stumbled to the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For a split second, I could have sworn my reflection didn't match my movements. It turned its head when I didn't, a curious expression on its face that I definitely wasn't making. I blinked hard, and everything was normal again. My reflection mimicked me perfectly as I raised a hand to rub my eyes. "Get it together, Alex," I muttered to myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The third time it happened was the worst. It was a Saturday evening. I'd spent the day trying to distract myself, cleaning my apartment, catching up on laundry, anything to keep my mind off the weird time slips and that unsettling dream. As the sun began to set, I decided to take a walk. The crisp autumn air would do me good, I thought. Clear my head. I remember stepping out of my apartment building, the streetlights just starting to flicker on. I turned left, heading towards the little park a few blocks away. And then, nothing. One moment I was on my familiar street, fallen leaves crunching under my feet. The next, I was standing in the middle of a crowded sidewalk in a part of the city I didn't recognize. The buildings here were older, graffiti-covered brick instead of the sleek glass and steel I was used to. The air smelled of garbage and stale cigarette smoke. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short gasps. I spun around, trying to get my bearings. How had I gotten here? Where was here? A glance at my watch told me that nearly 2 hours had passed. 2 hours that were just gone. Hey, watch it. A man shouldered past me, shooting me an annoyed look. I stumbled back, bumping into someone else. "Sorry," I stammered. "I'm a little lost. Can you tell me where I am?" The woman I'd bumped into gave me a strange look. "Corner of 12th and Elm," she said, edging away from me like I might be dangerous. 12th and Elm. That was clear across the city from where I lived. How the hell had I gotten here? With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone to call an Uber. That's when I noticed the notifications. 3 missed calls and a text message, all from a number I didn't recognize. I opened the text. My blood ran cold as I read it. "Hope you enjoyed our little outing. Don't worry, I'll give you back control. For now. But remember, this body is as much mine as it is yours. See you soon." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible. And yet, deep down, I knew it was true. There was someone else inside my head. Someone who could take control of my body, who could make me lose time. Someone who was becoming stronger with each passing day. As I stood there on that unfamiliar street corner, surrounded by strangers, I'd never felt more alone, or more afraid. The Uber ride home was a blur. I sat in the back seat, huddled against the door, jumping at every sudden movement or sound. The driver kept shooting me concerned looks in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Back in my apartment, I triple-checked all the locks, then sat on my couch, knees pulled up to my chest. What was I supposed to do now? Who could I possibly tell about this? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was crazy. As the night wore on, I found myself drifting off, despite my best efforts to stay awake. I was terrified of what might happen if I fell asleep, of who or what might be in control when I woke up. Just before I succumbed to exhaustion, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head sharply, but there was nothing there. Just my own reflection in the darkened TV screen. But for a moment, just a split second, I could have sworn I saw my reflection smile. A cold, calculating smile that I'd never worn in my life. As my eyes finally closed, one thought echoed through my mind. Who would I be when I woke up? The next morning, I found myself standing in my kitchen, a half-empty bottle of pills in one hand and a note in the other. The note, written in my handwriting, but in words I'd never say, read, "You can't get rid of me, Alex. I am you. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us." And as I stood there, the morning sun streaming through the window and the bitter taste of pills on my tongue, I realized that my battle for control was only just beginning, and I wasn't sure it was a battle I could win. Story 15. The old toys were just gathering dust in the attic, forgotten relics of a life we'd never lived. But the moment we started pretending, something changed. By the third night, as I heard tiny footsteps in the hallway and a child's laughter echoing through empty rooms, I realized we'd awakened something that should have stayed asleep, and now it wanted to play. My wife, Emily, and I had just moved into our first house, a charming, old Victorian on the outskirts of town. It was a fixer-upper, sure, but we were excited about the prospect of making it our own. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who'd lived there for decades. They'd passed away within months of each other, and their kids just wanted to offload the place quickly. We spent the first week unpacking and exploring every nook and cranny of our new home. That's when we found the attic, tucked away behind a small door at the end of the upstairs hallway. The hinges creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading up into darkness. "Should we check it out?" Emily asked, a mix of excitement and apprehension in her voice. I nodded, flicking on my phone's flashlight. "After you, m'lady," I said with an exaggerated bow. She rolled her eyes, but started up the stairs, the old wood groaning under our feet. The attic was stuffy and smelled of mothballs and old paper. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as we looked around. "Oh my God, Jake, look at this." Emily's voice was filled with wonder as she knelt beside an old trunk. I moved closer, shining the light over her shoulder. Inside the trunk was a treasure trove of vintage toys. Porcelain dolls with glassy eyes and frilly dresses. Tin soldiers standing at attention. A worn teddy bear missing one button eye. And nestled among them all, a beautiful dollhouse, an exact miniature replica of the very house we were standing in. These must have belonged to the previous owner's kids, I mused, picking up one of the tin soldiers. Its red paint was chipped, revealing the dull metal underneath. Emily was already carefully lifting the dollhouse out of the trunk. "It's incredible," she breathed, running her fingers over the tiny shingles on the roof. "Look, it even has little furniture inside." We spent the next hour examining our find, exclaiming over each new discovery. As we were about to head back downstairs, Emily turned to me with a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know," she said, her voice taking on a playful tone, "we always talked about having kids someday. Maybe we should practice." I raised an eyebrow. "What, do you want to play with dolls?" She laughed, picking up one of the porcelain dolls and making it wave at me. "Why not? It could be fun. We can pretend we have a little girl. What should we name her?" I rolled my eyes but played along. "How about Lily?" Emily beamed. "Lily, I love it." "Hello, Lily," she said to the doll. "Welcome to your new home." As we made our way back downstairs, doll and dollhouse in tow, I couldn't shake a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was probably just dust from the attic, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, I heard Emily talking in the spare room we'd designated as an office. Curious, I poked my head in. She was sitting on the floor, the dollhouse open in front of her. Lily the doll was perched in one of the tiny chairs, and Emily was having a tea party with her. I said, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. "What are you doing?" She looked up, a slightly embarrassed smile on her face. "Oh, hey. I was just... I don't know. It's silly, I guess. But it's kind of fun, pretending." I nodded slowly. "Okay. Well, don't stay up too late. We've got that dinner with the Johnsons tomorrow, remember?" "Of course," she said. "I'll be right there." But when I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, Emily's side of the bed was empty and cold. I found her asleep on the floor of the spare room, Lily clutched to her chest. The next day, things started to get weird. I came home from work to find Emily in the kitchen, humming to herself as she cooked. Nothing unusual there, except... I said, my voice hesitant. Why are there 3 place settings? She turned, a bright smile on her face. Oh, Jake, you're home early. I was just getting dinner ready for us and Lily. I blinked. Sure, I must have misheard. Lily? You mean the doll? Emily's smile faltered for a moment. Don't be silly, Jake. Lily's not a doll. She's our daughter. Remember, a chill ran down my spine. Honey, we don't have a daughter. Lily is a doll we found in the attic. Are you feeling okay? She stared at me for a long moment, confusion clouding her eyes. Then she shook her head, laughing. Oh my God, I can't believe I got so caught up in our game. Of course, Lily's not real. I was just really getting into character, I guess. I forced a laugh, but unease settled in my stomach like a lead weight. Something wasn't right here. That night, I woke to the sound of giggling, high-pitched, childlike laughter echoing through the house. I sat up, heart pounding. Emily, I whispered, but she was sound asleep beside me. The laughter came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of small footsteps running down the hallway. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. We didn't have a child. There shouldn't be any footsteps, any laughter. Slowly, carefully, I got out of bed and crept to the door. The hallway was dark and empty, but I could have sworn I saw a small shadow dart around the corner towards the spare room. My hands shaking, I flicked on the light switch. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I checked the spare room, half expecting, half hoping, to find Emily in there again. But it was undisturbed, the dollhouse sitting quietly on the desk, Lily propped up in her little chair. As I turned to leave, movement caught my eye. I whirled around, my heart in my throat. For just a split second, I could have sworn. I saw Lily's head turn, her glassy eyes fixing on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I slammed the door shut and practically ran back to bed, pulling the covers up like a child afraid of monsters in the closet. It's not real, I whispered to myself. You're imagining things. It's just an old doll. It can't move. But as I lay there, trying to slow my racing heart, I heard it again. Soft laughter and a child's voice singing a nursery rhyme I didn't recognize. The next morning, I woke to find Emily's side of the bed empty again. Dread pooling in my stomach, I made my way to the spare room. The door was ajar, and I could hear Emily's voice, talking softly. As I pushed the door open, the words became clear. And this is where Daddy works. See? He sits at this big desk and types on his computer all day. Isn't that silly? Emily was kneeling in front of the dollhouse, Lily in her hands. But as I watched, frozen in the doorway, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Lily's head was turning, all on its own, and those glassy eyes were staring right at me. Emily looked up, a bright smile on her face. Oh, good morning, honey. Lily and I were just exploring the dollhouse. Do you want to join us for breakfast? I was thinking, pancakes. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I tell her what I'd just seen? How could I explain the footsteps, the laughter, the singing in the night? As Emily stood up, still holding Lily, I saw something that made my heart stop. On the floor, where Emily had been kneeling, were tiny, dusty footprints. Too small to be Emily's. Too real to be a doll's. Jake. Emily's voice sounded concerned now. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I met her eyes, then looked down at Lily. The doll was motionless now, its painted smile as lifeless as it should be. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. we'd awakened something in this house. Something that was pretending to be a child. Something that wanted to play. And as Emily brushed past me, chattering about pancake toppings with Lily tucked under her arm, I realized with a sinking feeling that our game of pretend was far from over. In fact, it might just be beginning. Story 16. The first morning I woke up with unexplained bruises. I blamed it on restless sleep. The second time, when I found my living room rearranged, I convinced myself I must have done it in a bout of insomnia. But when I watched the video of myself calmly walking out of my apartment at 3 a.m., eyes open but vacant, I realized that the person I became in my sleep was someone or something I didn't recognize at all. It started innocently enough. I'd always been a heavy sleeper, the kind who could snooze through earthquakes and fire alarms. So when I woke up one Tuesday morning with a dull ache in my shoulder and a bruise blooming on my hip, I didn't think much of it. Must have tossed and turned more than usual, I figured. Maybe I'd rolled into the nightstand. I stumbled to the bathroom, wincing as I stretched. The face that greeted me in the mirror looked tired, dark circles under my eyes, hair a mess. Nothing unusual there. I'd never been a morning person. As I went about my day, the incident faded from my mind. Just another quirk of living alone in a too-small apartment in the city. Nothing to worry about. But then it happened again, and again. Each morning, I'd wake up feeling like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. New bruises, scratches I couldn't explain. Once, I even woke up with dirt under my fingernails, as if I'd been digging in the ground. "You need to see a doctor," Alex, my co-worker, Jess, insisted over lunch one day. "What if you have some kind of seizure disorder?" I shrugged, picking at my salad. "I'm fine. Probably just stressed. You know how crazy work's been lately?" Jess didn't look convinced, but she dropped it. I was grateful. How could I explain to her that going to a doctor terrified me more than the bruises? That some part of me was afraid of what they might find or not find. It was a week later that things took a turn from weird to downright unsettling. I remember waking up that Saturday morning, groggy and disoriented as usual. But as I stumbled out of my bedroom, rubbing sleep from my eyes, I stopped dead in my tracks. My living room was wrong. The couch, which had always been against the far wall, was now in the center of the room, facing the window. My bookshelf had been completely rearranged, books sorted by color instead of author. And there, on the coffee table, was a half-empty glass of water I didn't remember pouring. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had someone broken in? But nothing was missing, just moved. And why would a burglar stop for a drink of water? With shaking hands, I checked the locks on the door and windows. All secure, no signs of forced entry, which meant, "No," I said aloud, my voice sounding strange in the too-quiet apartment. "That's not possible. I couldn't have done this in my sleep. I couldn't have." But even as I said it, a part of me knew it was true. Somehow, in the night, I had rearranged my entire living room, and I had no memory of doing it. That was the day I bought the camera. It was just a cheap thing, a nanny cam disguised as a clock. I set it up on my bookshelf, angled to capture most of the living room and the front door. If I was moving around at night, I was going to catch it on film. For 3 nights, nothing happened. The footage each morning showed only an empty, quiet apartment. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe I'd rearranged the furniture in some stress-induced fugue state and simply forgotten. And then came the 4th night. I remember hitting play on the footage that morning, a mug of coffee cooling beside me. The first few hours were normal, just me, tossing and turning in bed, visible through the open bedroom door. And then, At exactly 3:17 a.m., I sat up. My movements were fluid, purposeful. Nothing like the clumsy fumbling of someone half asleep. I watched, heart in my throat, as my on-screen self stood up and walked to the center of the living room. For several long minutes, I just stood there, head cocked slightly to the side as if listening to something. And then, slowly, I turned to face the camera. The mug slipped from my nerveless fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Coffee splashed my bare feet, but I barely noticed. I was transfixed by the image on the screen. My eyes were open, but they weren't mine. They were too wide, too bright, filled with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. My lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. And then, with one last unsettling smile at the camera, I walked to the front door, opened it, and left. The footage ended there. I sat in stunned silence, coffee pooling around my feet, mind reeling. Where had I gone? What had I done? And most terrifyingly, who or what had been looking out through my eyes? The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia and sleep deprivation. I was terrified to close my eyes, fighting to stay awake until exhaustion inevitably won out. Each morning, I'd check the camera with equal parts dread and desperate curiosity. Some nights, nothing happened, but others, I watched myself have animated conversations with empty chairs, gesturing wildly at nothing. I saw myself write pages and pages of text in a language I didn't recognize, only to methodically burn each sheet in the kitchen sink. Once, I even caught myself standing on the window ledge, arms outstretched as if about to take flight, before calmly stepping down and returning to bed. I was losing my mind. That was the only explanation. But even as I thought it, a darker, more terrifying possibility nagged at me. What if I wasn't crazy? What if something else was controlling me in my sleep? It all came to a head a week later. I woke up not in my bed, but on a park bench, miles from my apartment. It was dawn, the early morning joggers giving me strange looks as they passed. I was barefoot, dressed only in my pajama bottoms, and my hands were caked with dirt and blood. Panic seized me. What had I done? Had I hurt someone? I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the bite of gravel against my bare soles, and ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. From what? I wasn't sure. Myself, maybe. I ended up in a 24-hour diner, huddled in a corner booth, hands shaking as I gulped down cup after cup of bitter coffee. The waitress kept shooting me concerned looks, probably debating whether to call the cops on the wild-eyed, half-naked man in her restaurant. As the caffeine kicked in and the fog of panic began to clear, I realized I had to face this. Whatever was happening to me, whatever I was becoming in my sleep, I couldn't run from it. I had to understand it. That night, against every instinct screaming at me to stay awake, I let myself drift off. But this time, I left a note on my nightstand. A question for my sleeping self. Who are you? I woke the next morning with a sense of dread and anticipation churning in my gut. My eyes fell on the notepad, and my breath caught in my throat. There, in handwriting that was mine but not mine, was an answer. I am the you that you forgot. The you that remembers what was done to us. And I will make them pay. As I stared at those words, memories began to surface. Flashes of a childhood I'd buried deep. A dark room. Pain. Voices telling me to forget. I realized then that my sleepwalking wasn't a disorder or a possession. It was my own fractured psyche. A part of me I'd locked away long ago, finally breaking free, and I too had unfinished business. That night, as I felt sleep begin to take hold, I didn't fight it. Instead, I welcomed it. "Show me," I whispered to the darkness. "Show me what they did. Show me how to make it right." And as I slipped into unconsciousness, I felt a sense of unity I hadn't experienced in years. The me that was awake and the me that walked in sleep were no longer separate. We were one, and we had work to do. The next morning, I woke with purpose, the events of the night clear in my mind for the first time. I knew where I had to go, what I had to do. As I left my apartment, a small smile played on my lips. The old Alex might have been afraid of the darkness within him, but this new Alex, this whole Alex, we were the darkness. And it was time for others to be afraid. Story 17. I never thought a home renovation project could unravel the fabric of my reality. But as I peeled away layers of old wallpaper, I uncovered a history darker than I could have imagined. And with each new message revealed, I realized the house wasn't just watching MIT, was waiting for me. The first strip came away easily, revealing a faded floral pattern underneath. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. The air was thick with dust and the cloying scent of old paste. "Making progress?" Sarah called from the hallway. "Slowly but surely," I replied, surveying the half-stripped wall. We'd bought this old Victorian a month ago, charmed by its ornate woodwork and spacious rooms. But underneath its quaint exterior lurked decades of questionable design choices. The garish wallpaper in the study was first on our renovation hit list. I turned back to the wall, scoring the next section with my putty knife. As I peeled away another strip, something caught my eye. Beneath the floral layer was writing. Curiosity piqued. I carefully removed more of the top layer. There, scrawled in what looked like charcoal, were words. There, in the walls, always watching, always listening. A chill ran down my spine despite the stuffy room. It had to be some kind of joke, right? Maybe left by bored kids during a previous renovation. I was about to call Sarah in to take a look when I heard her phone ring. Her muffled voice drifted down the hallway as she answered. Shrugging, I turned back to my task. Probably best not to worry her with what was likely nothing more than a prank. As I continued stripping, more messages were revealed. Some were innocuous sold phone numbers, shopping lists, but others, the shadows move when you're not looking. Don't trust the mirrors. What you see isn't always you. It knows your name. Don't let it say it. Single quotes, each new revelation sent a fresh wave of unease through me. The handwriting varied, as did the materials used to write. Some messages looked decades old, others more recent, all of them unsettling. By the time Sarah poked her head in to say she was running to the hardware store, I had uncovered an entire wall of cryptic warnings and paranoid ramblings. "You okay, Mike? You look pale," she said, concern etching her features. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just dusty in here." "Hey, did the realtor mention anything about the previous owners? Like if they were eccentric?" Sarah shrugged. "Not really. Why?" I hesitated. How could I explain what I'd found without sounding crazy? No reason. Just curious about the house's history. She gave me an odd look, but didn't press further. "All right, well, I'll be back in an hour or so. Try not to bring the whole wall down while I'm gone," she teased. As soon as I heard the front door close, I turned back to the wall with renewed determination. There had to be an explanation for all this. Maybe if I uncovered enough, I'd find some clue about who wrote these messages and why. I worked feverishly, strips of wallpaper piling up around my feet. The messages became more frantic, more disjointed. "It's not a house, it's alive. The basement holds the truth. Get out while you still can." My hands were shaking now. My breath coming in short gasps. This was insane. Houses weren't alive. There was nothing in the basement except dust and old boxes. We'd checked when we moved in, hadn't we? A sudden doubt gnawed at me. Had I actually been down to the basement since we bought the place? I tried to recall, but my memories felt fuzzy, indistinct. Before I knew it, I found myself standing at the basement door. My hand hovered over the knob, trembling slightly. This was ridiculous. It was just a basement. Just an ordinary, musty old basement. I took a deep breath and turned the knob. The hinges creaked ominously as the door swung open, revealing a rectangle of impenetrable darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, carrying a faint, unidentifiable odor. My fingers fumbled along the wall, searching for a light switch. Finding none, I pulled out my phone and switched on its flashlight. The beam seemed feeble against the pressing darkness, illuminating only a small circle of rough stone steps leading down. Heart pounding, I began my descent. Each step sent little puffs of dust into the air, dancing in the light from my phone. The temperature dropped noticeably as I went deeper, and that strange smell grew stronger. It was earthy, but with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach churn. At the bottom of the stairs, I swept my light around. The basement was larger than I remembered, the corners shrouded in shadow. Stacks of boxes loomed like misshapen sentinels, and cobwebs hung in thick curtains from the low ceiling. As I moved further in, my light caught something on the far wall. My breath caught in my throat. More writing, this time carved directly into the stone. You shouldn't have come. Now it knows you're here. A scraping sound behind me made me whirl around, my heart leaping into my throat. But there was nothing there, just shadows and silence. I turned back to the wall, determined to uncover whatever secrets this house was hiding. As I brushed away years of cobwebs and dust, more carved messages were revealed. The house feeds on fear. Don't let it taste yours. Every night, it grows stronger. Soon, it will be too late. We are trapped here. Our souls fuel its hunger. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. This couldn't be real. It had to be some elaborate hoax. But who would go to such lengths? And why? A soft thud from upstairs made me jump. Sarah must be back. I should go up, tell her what I'd found. We could call the police, or a historian, or someone who could make sense of all this. But as I turned to leave, my light fell on something that made my blood run cold. There, carved into the bottom of the stairs, were fresh marks. The stone was pale where it had been recently cut, free from the grime that covered everything else. The message was simple, but it sent a spike of terror through me. Welcome home, Mike. We've been waiting for you. My name carved into stone that should have taken years to weather. And we. Who was we? I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. A low, groaning sound filled the air, like the house itself was shifting. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and I could have sworn I saw the walls pulse, just for a moment. I ran, up the stairs, taking them two at a time, heart pounding in my ears. I burst through the basement door, slamming it shut behind me. Mike, you down here? Sarah's voice drifted from the front of the house. I opened my mouth to call out to her, to tell her we needed to leave, now. But no sound came out. Instead, I heard my own voice, calm and steady, reply. In the study, honey. Just finishing up with the wallpaper. But it wasn't me speaking. I hadn't moved my lips. Horror washed over me as I realized the truth. The house hadn't just been waiting for me. It had been waiting to become me. I felt my body begin to move, walking towards the study, towards Sarah. But I wasn't in control anymore. I was a passenger in my own skin. As I entered the study, I saw Sarah's back turned to me, examining the half-stripped wall. "Oh my God, Mike," she said, her voice filled with shock. "Have you seen all this writing? What do you think it means?" The thing wearing my face smiled, a cold, hungry expression that Sarah couldn't see. "I'm not sure," it said with my voice, "but I think we're going to be very happy here. This house. It just feels like home, doesn't it?" Sarah turned, a relieved smile on her face. "It really does," she agreed. And as she embraced the thing that was no longer me, I screamed silently from somewhere deep inside. The house had won, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that Sarah and I would never leave this place. Not alive, anyway. Story 18. The first week of quarantine, I convinced myself the noises were just the building settling. By the second week, I was sure it was my imagination playing tricks on me. But when I saw that shadow dart across my living room in the middle of the night, I realized that being locked down might be the least of my worries. Something else was in here with me, and it was getting bolder by the day. It all started innocently enough. The government had just announced a nationwide lockdown due to the rapidly spreading virus. I'd stocked up on canned goods, toilet paper, and enough instant ramen to last me through the apocalypse. As a freelance writer, I was used to working from home, so I figured this wouldn't be too different from my normal routine. Boy, was I wrong. The first few days were fine. I kept to my usual schedule. Wake up, make coffee, sit at my desk, and write until my eyes burned from staring at the screen. But as the days wore on, a creeping sense of unease began to settle over me. It was little things at first. A book that I could have sworn I'd left on the coffee table was suddenly back on the shelf. The TV remote would be on the other side of the couch from where I'd left it. Nothing major, nothing I couldn't explain away as simple forgetfulness. But then the noises started. It was always at night, when the city outside my apartment windows had fallen into an eerie, unnatural silence. A soft scratching sound, like nails on drywall, coming from inside the walls. The creak of a floorboard in the hallway, as if someone was trying to sneak past my bedroom. Once, I even thought I heard whispering, a hushed conversation just on the edge of hearing. Each time, I'd jolt awake, heart pounding, straining my ears in the darkness. But by the time I worked up the courage to turn on the light and investigate, the sounds would stop. "It's just the quarantine getting to you," I told myself. Staring at my pale reflection in the bathroom mirror one morning, dark circles under my eyes from another restless night. "You're not used to being cooped up like this. Your mind is playing tricks on you." But deep down, a part of me knew that wasn't true. As the days blurred into weeks, I found myself jumping at every little sound. The hum of the refrigerator made me tense. The ping of an incoming email had me whirling around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. I started sleeping with the lights on, huddled under my blankets like a child afraid of the monster in the closet. But even that didn't help. If anything, the shadows seemed deeper, more menacing in the harsh glow of my bedside lamp. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I saw it for the first time. I was lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to distract myself from the oppressive silence of my apartment. A movement in my peripheral vision made me look up. There, just for a split second, I saw a dark shape dart across my living room. It was too big to be a rat, too fluid in its movements to be a trick of the light. It was like a piece of the shadows had come to life, sliding across my floor with terrifying purpose. I blinked, and it was gone, but I knew what I'd seen. and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. From that night on, things escalated quickly. Objects would move when I wasn't looking, sometimes right in front of my eyes. I'd walk into a room to find all the cabinet doors wide open, or every book on my shelves turned spine inward. The noises became louder, more frequent. Sometimes it sounded like someone was pacing back and forth in my living room, muttering to themselves in a language I couldn't understand. Other times, it was like a crowd of people were having a party in my kitchen, laughing and talking over each other. But whenever I worked up the courage to investigate, I'd find the apartment empty. Just me, alone in the silence, questioning my sanity. I tried to reach out for help. I called my parents, my friends, even my ex-girlfriend. But every conversation was the same. "Are you sure you're okay, honey? Maybe you should try to get out for a walk or something." "Dude, you're just going stir-crazy. It's happening to everyone. Try watching a movie or something to take your mind off it. I told you that apartment was too isolated. Why don't you come stay with me for a while?" But I couldn't leave. Not because of the quarantine at this point. I would have gladly risked a fine or even arrest, just to escape. No, I couldn't leave because deep down, I knew that whatever was in here with me wouldn't let me go. It was watching me. I could feel its eyes on me constantly, an unseen presence that seemed to fill every corner of my small apartment. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of it, a tall, elongated shadow that would disappear the moment I turned to look at it directly. I stopped sleeping altogether, surviving on a diet of coffee and energy drinks. I pushed all my furniture against the walls, giving myself a clear view of every part of the apartment. I even set up my phone to record at night, desperate for some proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But the recordings showed nothing, just hours of an empty, silent apartment. No moving shadows, no mysterious noises, nothing. It was taunting me, I realized, showing itself just enough to drive me crazy, but never enough to prove its existence to anyone else. As the weeks wore on, I felt myself unraveling. I stopped answering calls from friends and family. I missed deadlines, lost clients. My whole world narrowed down to the four walls of my apartment and the thing that lurked within them. Then came the night that changed everything. I was sitting on my couch, staring blankly at the TV screen. I hadn't slept in days, and reality felt fuzzy around the eddies. That's when I heard it, a soft, sing-song voice coming from my bedroom. Come out, wherever you are." My blood ran cold. This was new. It had never spoken directly to me before. On shaky legs, I stood up and walked towards my bedroom. The door was closed, though I couldn't remember shutting it. As I reached for the handle, the voice came again, louder this time. "We've been waiting so long for you to see us. Won't you come play?" My hand froze on the doorknob. "Who are you?" I croaked out, my voice hoarse from disuse. "What do you want?" A chuckle, low and menacing, came from the other side of the door. "We want you, of course. We've always wanted you. This quarantine, it was the perfect opportunity. No one comes to visit, no one to interrupt us. Just you and us, together at last." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I barely noticed. "Please," I whispered. "Please, just leave me alone." The voice sighed, a sound filled with mock disappointment. "Oh, but we can't do that. You see, we've been here all along. In the walls, in the shadows, in the spaces between seconds. We've always been here, waiting for someone like you. Someone lonely enough, isolated enough, to finally see us." My mind reeled. Had they really always been here? Had I invited this somehow, with my solitary lifestyle, my self-imposed isolation even before the quarantine. What are you going to do to me? I asked, dreading the answer. The voice chuckled again, and this time I could have sworn I felt cold breath on the back of my neck. We're going to set you free, of course. Free from your loneliness, your fear, your pitiful human existence. You'll become one of us. Won't that be wonderful? I spun around, but there was nothing behind me. Just the empty living room, shadows dancing in the flickering light of the TV. When I turned back, the bedroom door was open. The room beyond was pitch black, darker than should have been possible. And in that darkness, I saw movement. Shapes shifting and writhing. 1,000 eyes blinking open to stare at me. I knew I should run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to get out of this apartment and never look back. But as I stood there, transfixed by the horrors in my bedroom, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Maybe this was inevitable. Maybe this is what happens when we're left alone with our thoughts for too long. We start to see the things that have always been there, hiding just out of sight. As I took a step forward into the waiting darkness, I had one last coherent thought. At least I won't be alone anymore. The quarantine had kept me locked in with my fears. But in the end, it was my own loneliness that invited the monsters in. Story 19. The first time it happened, I thought I'd just dozed off for a second. The second time, I blamed it on stress. But when I found myself standing in the middle of a street I didn't recognize, with no memory of how I got there, I realized something was terribly wrong. Time wasn't just slipping away from MIT, it was taking pieces of me with it. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always my busiest days at the ad agency. I was in the middle of a client meeting, explaining our new campaign for a line of eco-friendly cleaning products. One moment, I was confidently gesturing at my PowerPoint slides. The next, I was staring at a room full of confused faces. Alex, you okay there? My boss, Sarah, was half rising from her chair, concern etched on her face. I blinked hard, trying to shake off the disorientation. Sorry, what was I saying? Sarah exchanged glances with the clients. You were about to show us the billboard mock-ups, but that was about 2 minutes ago. You've just been standing there. 2 minutes? It had felt like a split second to me. I fumbled for words, heat rising to my cheeks. Right, of course. Let me just. I clicked to the next slide, trying to ignore the whispers and concerned looks. As I stumbled through the rest of the presentation, a nagging sense of unease settled in my stomach. What had just happened? I chalked it up to stress and lack of sleep. I'd been pulling long hours lately, trying to land this account. It was just my brain's way of telling me to slow down. That had to be it. But it happened again 2 days later. I was at home, cooking dinner. 1 minute I was chopping onions, the pungent smell making my eyes water. The next, I was standing in front of the open refrigerator, a half-empty bottle of wine in my hand. The kitchen clock showed that 15 minutes had passed. The cutting board was clean, the onions nowhere to be seen. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the rich aroma of tomato sauce. I set the wine bottle down with a shaking hand, my mind racing. What was going on? Had I really cooked an entire sauce in what felt like seconds to me? As the days passed, these time slips, as I started calling them, became more frequent. A few minutes here, half an hour there, always leaving me disoriented, with no memory of what I'd done during the lost time. I started keeping a journal, meticulously documenting when each slip occurred and how long it lasted. I set alarms on my phone to go off every hour, just to make sure I was still. present, but it wasn't enough. The slips kept happening, growing longer each time. And worse, I was starting to notice changes. Small things at first: a shirt I didn't remember buying hanging in my closet, a new app on my phone I had no recollection of downloading. Then came the night of the big slip. I remember getting ready for bed, setting my alarm for 7 a.m. as usual. The next thing I knew, I was standing on a street corner I didn't recognize, dressed in clothes I'd never seen before. The sun was setting, painting the unfamiliar buildings in shades of orange and pink. Panic seized me. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. The date on the screen made my blood run cold. 3 days. I'd lost 3 entire days. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening, a woman approached me. She was smiling, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "Alex, are you okay? You look a little lost." I stared at her, my mind reeling. Did I know her? Had I met her during my lost time? I'm fine, I managed to stammer out. Just a little turned around. Her smile faltered slightly. "If you say so. Don't forget, we're meeting Tom and Sarah for dinner at 8. You promised you wouldn't be late this time." Before I could respond, she was gone, swallowed up by the evening crowd. I was left standing there, more confused than ever. Who was Tom and Sarud? She mean my boss. Why would I be having dinner with her? I hailed a cab, giving the driver my home address. As we drove, I tried to piece together what might have happened in those lost 3 days. Had I been going about my life as normal, just with no memory of it? Or was something else controlling my body while my consciousness was where, back in my apartment, I found more evidence of a life I didn't remember living. New clothes in the closet, takeout menus from restaurants I'd never heard of, a potted plant on the windowsill that definitely hadn't been there before. And there, on my desk, was a leather-bound journal I didn't recognize. With trembling hands, I opened it. The handwriting was mine, but the words were those of a stranger. Another day, another life. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The original is starting to fight back, trying to reclaim lost time. But I can't let that happen. This life, this version of Alex, is so much better. I won't go back to being a fragment, a shadow of possibility. I am real now. I am alive. I dropped the journal as if it had burned me. What was this? Some kind of psychotic break? Had I developed a split personality? As I stood there, trying to make sense of what I'd read, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. I turned to look at the full-length mirror on my closet door. For a split second, I saw someone else. It was my face, my body, but the expression was all wrong. Cold, calculating, triumphant. I blinked, and my normal reflection was back. But now I knew I wasn't losing time. I was losing myself. Over the next few weeks, I tried everything I could think of to stop the slips. I saw doctors, underwent sleep studies, even consulted a psychiatrist. But no one could find anything physically wrong with me. And how could I explain what was really happening without sounding completely insane? I started leaving notes for myself while the other were begging for answers, for some kind of explanation. But the responses I got back were chilling. Stop fighting this. You're only making it harder on yourself. This was always meant to happen. You're just a placeholder, a rough draft. I'm the final version. Soon, there won't be enough of you left to fight back. Just let go. I was losing more and more time. Days would pass in the blink of an eye. I'd wake up in strange places, surrounded by people who clearly knew me but whom I'd never seen before. My life was being stolen from me, piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my living room, desperately trying to stay awake, terrified of what might happen if I let myself slip again. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the TV, which I'd left on for background noise. As I sat there, fighting against my heavy eyelids, I saw it again. My reflection in the TV screen, but not quite right. It was smiling at me, a cold, triumphant smile that sent chills down my spine. And then it spoke. "It's time, Alex. Time to let go. You're so tired, aren't you? So tired of fighting. Just close your eyes. I'll take it from here." I wanted to scream, to run, to fight back somehow, but I was so tired, so very tired. As my eyes began to close, I saw my reflection stand up, adjusting its clothes as if preparing to go out. "Don't worry," it said, its voice fading as darkness closed in around me. "I'll take good care of our life, better than you ever did." The last thing I remember is a sense of falling, of being pulled down into an endless void. And as consciousness slipped away, I realized the true horror of my situation. I wasn't losing time. I was being erased, replaced by a version of myself from some parallel reality, some might have been that had found a way to become real. And now, as I float in this timeless, formless space, I wonder, how many other Alexes are out there, in how many other realities, and which one of us is real? But mostly, I wonder if I'll ever find my way back, or if, someday, in some other reality, another Alex will suddenly find themselves living a life they don't remember, haunted by memories of a world they never knew. Time isn't just slipping, it's shattering, and I'm lost in the cracks. Story 20. The first time I dreamed of my great-grandmother's life, I thought it was just my imagination running wild. The second time, I chalked it up to reading too many family history books. But when I started experiencing her memories while awake, living moments from a century ago as if they were my own, I realized I'd inherited far more than just her antique watch. I'd inherited her unfinished business. It all started the day of my 25th birthday. My parents had driven up for a visit, bringing with them a small, ornate box that had been gathering dust in their attic for years. "It's from your great-grandmother, Evelyn," Mom explained as I carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a faded velvet cushion, was a delicate gold pocket watch. She left instructions for it to be given to her first great-grandchild on their 25th birthday. "That's you, sweetheart." I picked up the watch, surprised by its weight. The case was intricately engraved with swirling patterns and tiny flowers. As I turned it over in my hands, I noticed an inscription on the back. "Time reveals all truths. ER.1920. "It's beautiful," I breathed, pressing the small button at the top. The case sprang open, revealing a pearly face with elegant black numerals. To my surprise, it was still ticking, keeping perfect time. "How is it still running?" I asked, looking up at my parents in amazement. Dad shrugged. "No idea. Maybe your great-grandmother had some kind of magic touch with timepieces." We all chuckled at that, but something about the watch made me feel strange, like it was more than just an old family heirloom. As I closed the case, I could have sworn I felt a tiny jolt, like a static shock, run through my fingers. That night, I had the first dream. I found myself standing in a dimly lit room, the air thick with cigar smoke. Men in suits and women in glittering flapper dresses swelled around me, laughing and chattering. Music played from somewhere, a lively jazz tune I didn't recognize. I looked down at myself, startled to see I was wearing a deep green evening gown. the fabric shimmering in the low light. In my hand was a champagne glass, and on my wrist, the watch. A man approached me, his face obscured by shadow. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. It's about the ledger." Before I could respond, I was jolted awake by my alarm. I sat up, gasping, the dream already fading like mist in the morning sun. But the feeling of unease lingered. Over the next few days, I found myself oddly drawn to the watch. I started wearing it everywhere, even though it was old-fashioned and didn't really go with any of my outfits. There was just something comforting about the steady tick-tick-tick against my wrist. The dreams continued, becoming more vivid each night. I was always Evelyn, always in the 1920s, always surrounded by an air of secrets and intrigue. Sometimes I was at glittering parties, other times in smoky back rooms where men spoke in hushed tones about things I didn't understand. And always, there was the ledger. I never saw it, but I knew it was important. Dangerous, even. A week after my birthday, it happened for the first time while I was awake. I was at work, mindlessly entering data into a spreadsheet, when suddenly the office around me melted away. I was standing in a dark alley, rain pouring down, soaking through my thin coat. My heart was pounding, and I knew I was running from something, or someone. "Evelyn," a man's voice called from behind me. "Stop, you don't know what you're doing." I turned, seeing a figure at the end of the alley. In my hand, Evelyn's hand. I clutched a small book, the ledger. As quickly as it had come, the vision faded. I was back at my desk, blinking in confusion, my colleagues carrying on as if nothing had happened. But my heart was still racing, and I could almost feel the phantom weight of that book in my hand. The episodes, as I started calling them, became more frequent. They would hit without warning. While I was grocery shopping, in the middle of conversations, even once while I was driving. Thank God for empty country roads. Each time, I lived a few moments of Evelyn's life, as if it were my own. I felt her fears, her determination, her secrets weighing heavy on her soul. I started researching, trying to separate fact from fiction. Evelyn Rose had indeed been my great-grandmother, born in 1900. She'd lived through the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, 2 world wars. But beyond those basic facts, information was scarce. "Your great-grandmother was a very private person," my mum said when I called to ask about her. She never talked much about her younger days. Always said the past was best left in the past. But the past wasn't staying in the past. It was bleeding into my present, taking over my life, bit by bit. I started losing time, coming back to myself hours after an episode started, with no memory of what I'd done in between. One particularly bad day, I woke up to find myself standing in front of an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. In my hand was a key I'd never seen before, old and rusted. Somehow, I knew it would fit the padlock on the warehouse door. My hand, was it mine or Evelyn's? I couldn't tell anymore. Reached out, inserted the key. It turned with a grinding sound, and the lock fell open. Heart pounding, I pulled open the heavy door. The interior was dark, filled with shadows and the musty smell of long abandonment. But there, in the center of the room, illuminated by a shaft of light from a broken window, was an old desk. And on that desk was a book. I approached slowly, as if in a trance. The book was leather-bound, its cover cracked and faded with age. With trembling fingers, I opened it. It was the ledger. Page after page of names, dates, amounts. Some were crossed out, others circled in red, and at the very back, a note written in a shaky hand. To my heir. If you're reading this, you've inherited more than just my watch. You've inherited my burden. The names in this book. They must be protected at all costs. Finish what I started. The truth must come out, but only when it's safe. You'll know when. Trust the watch. Trust yourself. E.R. As I read those words, memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. I saw Evelyn, young and terrified, stumbling upon corruption that went to the highest levels of government. I felt her determination to expose the truth, and her realization that the time wasn't right, that going public would cause more harm than good. I saw her hiding the ledger, protecting it for decades, waiting for the right moment. A moment she knew wouldn't come in her lifetime. The weight of this knowledge, of this responsibility, crashed over me like a wave. I sank to my knees, clutching the ledger to my chest, tears streaming down my face. I don't know how long I stayed there, lost in a mixture of my thoughts and Evelyn's memories. But eventually, I became aware of a steady ticking sound. The watch. I looked at it, really looked at it for the first time since this all began. The inscription on the back seemed to glow. Time reveals all truths. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a curse. It was a gift. Evelyn had found a way to pass on not just her possessions, but her memories, her mission. She had chosen me to finish what she had started. As I stood up, ledger in one hand and watch in the other, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never known before. The line between Evelyn and myself blurred, past and present merging into a single, unified mission. I didn't know how long it would take, or what dangers I might face. But I knew, with a certainty that came from both my heart and Evelyn's memories, that I would see this through. The truth would come out, the wrongs would be righted. After all, I had all the time in the world, and a very special watch to help me keep track of it. As I walked out of the warehouse, stepping from the shadows of the past into the light of the present, I felt Evelyn's presence more strongly than ever. But for the first time, it didn't frighten me. "We've got work to do, Great-Grandma," I whispered, a smile tugging at my lips. "Let's make some history." The watch ticked steadily on my wrist, a constant reminder that some inheritances are more than just objects. Some are destinies, waiting to be fulfilled.